Hello beautiful people. Welcome to The Fiction Wizard. In today's episode, we explore, what if Fawkes burned every block on Harry during sorting and the Founder's ghosts declared him the true heir of Hogwarts? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Burning Crown. The Great Hall smelled like candle wax and old stone and something electric that hadn't been there a moment ago. Harry Potter stood in the line of first-years shuffling through the enormous doors, and he was trying very hard not to stare at absolutely everything simultaneously. The ceiling was gone, or rather, it wasn't gone, it was sky, deep violet and scattered with stars that had no business being indoors, and the four long tables stretched out ahead of them like something from a painting he'd once seen in a library book and immediately wanted to live inside. Hundreds of older students watched the new arrivals with expressions ranging from bored to genuinely curious, and the candles floating overhead threw warm gold light across all of it, and Harry thought, with a certainty he couldn't explain, I know this place. Not from a book. Not from anything Uncle Vernon had ever told him, which was nothing. It was something deeper and older than memory, a feeling that lived in his chest like an ember that had been waiting for air. Professor McGonagall led them to a stop before a battered three-legged stool, and on the stool sat the most disreputable hat Harry had ever seen. It was tall and pointed and patched and looked like it had survived several small disasters, and then it moved, a crease near the brim stretching open like a mouth, and it sang. The song was about the four houses, their qualities, their histories, their founders. Harry listened with half his attention and spent the other half watching the hall. The Slytherin table had a particular quality of stillness, not boredom but calculation, every face angled slightly toward the first-years like they were already being evaluated. The Gryffindor table was louder, more physical, older students leaning on each other's shoulders. Ravenclaw sat with books open. Hufflepuff had somehow already produced snacks from somewhere. McGonagall began calling names in alphabetical order. Harry watched Hannah Abbott sit under the hat for 20 seconds before it bellowed, Hufflepuff, and watched the Hufflepuff table erupt. He watched Terry Boot go to Ravenclaw. He watched Hermione Granger, who had been whispering incantations under her breath in the corridor, practically vibrate with excitement as the hat took 4 seconds and put her in Gryffindor. He was thinking, distantly, about what house he might belong to, when he noticed the phoenix. It was perched on a stand near the staff table, and Harry had clocked it earlier without really registering it, a brilliant red and gold bird, enormous, with eyes like amber caught in firelight. He'd heard Hagrid mention it once during their journey to Diagon Alley. That's Fawkes, that is. Dumbledore's bird. Ancient creature. Phoenixes choose their people, they do. Fawkes was not watching the sorting. Fawkes was watching Harry. The bird's amber eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made Harry's skin prickle. Not a threatening stare, more like recognition. Like someone seeing a face they'd been waiting a long time to see. Potter, Harry. The whisper that went through the hall at that name was like a wind through dry grass, immediate, electric, and gone in a second. Harry walked to the stool and sat down, and the hat dropped over his head and plunged him into darkness. Well, said a voice inside his skull, dry and ancient and amused. This is unusual. What is? Harry thought. You. There are, layers here that shouldn't, wait. The voice went oddly silent for a moment, and then Harry felt something strange. Not magic, exactly, he'd felt magic before, the accidental kind, the surge of emotion that moved things and changed things without him asking it to. This was different. This was like having a hand pressed against a locked door and feeling the lock resist, from the inside. Someone has put blocks on you, the hat said, and its tone had shifted entirely. The dryness was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like outrage. Multiple layers. Very old work. Very careful work. I cannot see you clearly at all, it is like trying to read a book through several sheets of glass. Blocks, Harry thought. What does that mean? It means, the hat never finished the sentence. The sound Fawkes made was not a note. It wasn't a song. It was the sound a star makes when it decides to stop being a star and become something else entirely, a pure, shattering tone that cut through the warm acoustics of the great hall like a blade through water, and every single person in the room went absolutely still. And then the phoenix was simply there, not flying, not crossing the room in any observable way, just present, hovering above the stool, above Harry, its wings spread to their full magnificent span, and the light that came off it was not the warm gold of the candles. It was white. It was the color of something that had been burning since before the castle was built. It opened its beak and sang one note, and Harry felt the blocks break. It wasn't painful, exactly. It was like having your ears pop after a long time at altitude, a release, sudden and profound, and in the moment of release you realize how much pressure there had been, because it is all gone now and the absence of it is enormous. Something in Harry's chest cracked open like an egg, and out of it poured everything that had been caged in there, every scrap of his magic that had been pressed down and contained and redirected since, he understood now, with a clarity that felt almost cruel, since before he could walk. The hat flew off his head. Harry didn't grab it. He didn't need to. It was hovering in the air in front of him, and it was shaking, and the crease of its mouth was open wider than he'd ever seen, and it said, not shouted, not announced, but said, in a voice that somehow filled every corner of the room, "This is unprecedented. This is entirely," and then the floor shook. Not like an earthquake. Not like something structural failing. Like something waking up. The stone beneath Harry's feet lit from within, a deep amber glow like sunlight through old honey, pulsing in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. It spread outward from the stool in waves, tracing lines through the mortar between the flagstones, ancient lines, geometric, symbols that no one in the hall had any context for, carved into the foundation of the building 1,000 years ago and never meant to be seen again until now. The light reached the 4 table platforms and went up the legs and along the tables themselves, and the candles overhead flared brilliant white, and somewhere in the walls, inside the walls, behind the stone, Harry heard voices. Not one voice. 4. They did not speak in English. They spoke in something older, something that predated the language the hall used for everything else, and yet every single person in the room understood them the way you understand a dream, not with your mind but with something underneath it. The 4 voices braided together and then separated and then braided again, and the meaning that rose out of them settled into the room like a stone settling into deep water. He has come. The one who carries all 4. The one the castle chose before he was born. The heir. The light in the walls intensified, and then they came through it. The first was enormous, or gave the impression of enormity, the way certain people do without actually being the tallest in a room. He was broad, bearded, wearing robes that looked like they'd been made from the pelt of something that no longer existed, and his translucent ghost self flickered with a deep red that matched nothing in the hall's warm palette. Godric Gryffindor did not walk through the wall so much as the wall opened for him, the stone parting like a curtain, and the red light poured through in his wake. The second was sharp in every particular, sharp face, sharp eyes, sharp clothing even in death, robes precise and dark, her silver ghost light cool and intelligent. Rowena Ravenclaw entered from the opposite wall with the manner of someone who had reviewed all available data before attending and found it adequate. The third was softer in outline but no less present, round-faced and warm, wearing an apron over robes that she clearly did not consider incongruous, and her yellow light was the color of early morning in summer. Helga Hufflepuff smiled, and the room felt fractionally warmer. The fourth came last, and he came from below, from the floor itself, from the stone between the flagstones, rising through the foundation of the castle he had built and then buried secrets in, and his green light was the dark shade of deep water, and his face was the face of someone who had been angry for a very long time and had made a decision, down in the dark, to put that anger aside for this moment. Salazar Slytherin straightened to his full height, and he looked at Harry Potter. The hall was so quiet that Harry could hear himself breathing. He probably should have been terrified. He'd been here approximately 4 minutes. He'd only found out he was a wizard 2 months ago. He was 11 years old, sitting on a stool, and the 4 founders of the most powerful magical institution in Britain were looking at him. He wasn't terrified. He was paying attention. That was a thing Harry had learned to do very early in life, in the Dursleys' house, where not paying attention meant missing the moment when the atmosphere shifted and you needed to become invisible. He had learned to read rooms the way some people read books. And what this room was telling him, what it felt like underneath all the spectacle and light and ancient voices, was, this is yours. Not a gift. Not an award. A responsibility that had been waiting for someone to be willing to pick it up. Gryffindor spoke first, because of course he did. Boy. His voice was not what you'd expect from a ghost, not thin or reedy or distant. It was present in the way that stone is present. You carry my blood. Diluted through 1,000 years, but still burning. I recognize it. You carry mine as well, Ravenclaw said, from the other side, her head tilted with the particular curiosity of someone who has found an interesting specimen. The analytical thread. I can see it, even through what was done to you. Even through the blocks. And mine, Helga said warmly, in the loyalty. In the way you stood with the boy on the boat even though you didn't know him, because he looked lonely. I noticed. Harry blinked. He hadn't realized anyone had seen that. Slytherin had not spoken yet. He was still watching Harry with those dark, measured eyes, and when he finally moved, it was to step forward, through 2 of the other founders, through the stool, to stand directly before Harry at a distance of approximately 2 feet, and Harry looked up at him and did not flinch. They will tell you I am a villain, Slytherin said quietly. The stories that survived me are not kind ones. I left this castle in anger and I left behind things that reflected that anger, and I do not entirely disown them. He paused. But I built the dungeons. I built the foundations. Every stone in this floor passed through my hands before it passed through anyone else's. And you carry my blood as well, boy. The Peveril line. The old tongue. You woke the serpent's door 2 months ago in Diagon Alley and did not know what you had done. Harry thought back to Diagon Alley. To the snake in the reptile house at the zoo. To the moment he'd spoken without knowing he was speaking a different language. Parseltongue, he said. Among other things. Slytherin stepped back. I recognize you, Harry Potter. As does this castle. As does every stone I laid and every charm I wove into the foundation. You are the convergence point we wrote into the architecture. Not an accident. Not a prophecy. A design, one that required 1,000 years to come to fruition. The 4 founders turned to face each other, a brief, wordless exchange, the kind that passes between people who have known each other for centuries even if most of those centuries were spent in death, and then they turned back to the hall. Gryffindor's voice, when he spoke this time, was not for Harry. It was for everyone. Hear us, children of the school we built. His ghostlight flared, and every candle in the hall went briefly red. We do not appear lightly. We do not appear for ceremony. We appear when the castle calls us, and the castle calls us now, for the first time in 1,000 years, because what we designed has arrived. Ravenclaw took it up seamlessly. The Heir of Hogwarts is not a lineage title. It is not a crown. It is a bond, between a witch or wizard and the castle itself. A bond that allows the heir to hear the castle, to command its spaces, to access what has been sealed, and to bear responsibility for what lives within these walls. The last heir died without naming a successor, Helga said, and her warm voice carried a note of real grief. We have waited since. The boy on the stool is our answer, Slytherin said flatly. He carries the blood of all 4 founders, a convergence that has not existed since the 2nd generation. He was blocked, suppressed, caged, and tonight the castle's own familiar chose to end that suppression. He glanced at Fawkes, who had settled back onto his stand and was now preening one wing with magnificent unconcern. Phoenixes have their own council. Dumbledore, at the staff table, had not moved. He was watching all of this with an expression that Harry would later learn to read very precisely, the expression of someone doing rapid, expert recalculation behind a face carefully kept neutral. His half-moon glasses caught the ghost light and gave nothing away. Gryffindor looked out at the hall one last time, and when he spoke again there was something in it that was less declaration and more memory, a grief that had never quite resolved itself. We built this school because we believed that magic, in all its forms, belonged to those who could learn it, not just those who were born to the right families. We argued about many things, we four. But we agreed on that. He looked at Harry. Guard that, boy. That is what you've been left with. Not power. A purpose. And then, as gradually as they had come, the founders began to fade, not disappearing but receding, their ghost light pulling back into the walls and the floor and the ancient carved symbols, which continued to glow for a long moment before they, too, went dark. Fawkes let out one small, bright trill, almost a laugh, and tucked his head back under his wing. The hat, which had been floating this entire time, settled back down onto the stool. The hall remained in complete silence. Harry looked out at the 1,000 faces staring at him, first years, older students, teachers, all of them frozen in the particular way that people are frozen when something unprecedented has just happened and no one has the social vocabulary to process it yet. Then Hermione Granger, seated at the Gryffindor table and already holding a quill with which she had been attempting to take notes, said very clearly, "What house did the hat actually decide on?" The hat cleared its throat. "All of them," it said. "Technically. Which is also a first." "Right," Harry said, and got off the stool. He walked to the Gryffindor table, not because the hat had sorted him there specifically, but because that was where Ron Weasley was sitting, and Ron Weasley was the first person Harry had ever chosen to talk to of his own free will, and that felt like a better basis for a decision than almost anything else. He sat down across from him and reached for the bread. Ron stared at him for a long moment. "So," Ron said. "So," Harry said. "That was a bit much," Ron said. "Yeah," Harry agreed. He took a piece of bread and buttered it. "What's for dinner?" The laughter that went through the Gryffindor table at that was the good kind, the kind that breaks the tension in the right place, that says we are going to be all right, and dinner began. But across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy sat with both hands flat on the table and an expression that was trying very hard to be contempt and failing at it, because what it actually was underneath was something much more complicated and much more dangerous. And at the staff table, Albus Dumbledore reached out very slowly and picked up his goblet and took a long drink and said nothing at all. The feast was magnificent. Harry ate everything he could reach, because 11 years of Dudley's leftovers had given him a finely tuned appreciation for tables that had enough on them, and Ron ate with the comfortable efficiency of someone from a large family who has learned that food waits for no one. Hermione came and sat beside them without being invited and immediately began explaining what she knew about Heirs of Hogwarts from her reading, which was considerable. "The concept appears in Hogwarts, a history in a footnote," she said, "which I found suspicious at the time. Something that's significant reduced to a footnote, but now I think someone edited it. The full tradition, as far as I can piece together, is that the heir doesn't just inherit status. They can actually commune with the castle. Hear it. Navigate it. There are supposed to be rooms that only open for the heir and sealed vaults that, Hermione," Ron said. "What? We haven't been here an hour." "Information doesn't have a time limit, Ron. He just had 4 dead people appear out of the floor and announce he owns the school. Maybe let him eat for a bit." Harry looked at Hermione. "I want to know. Tell me later, though, properly, with the book. Can you get your copy out tonight?" Hermione's expression did the thing where someone tries not to look too pleased and does not entirely succeed. "I already put a bookmark in the relevant section." "Of course you did," Ron said, but he didn't sound annoyed. The great hall around them had returned to something like its normal noise level, but it wasn't quite the same as before the sorting. There was a quality of awareness now, glances from the older tables, hushed conversations that hadn't been there before, a current of something's changed running underneath the ordinary sounds of 500 people eating. Several of the ghosts who normally drifted through the hall had taken up positions near the walls and were observing the Gryffindor table with expressions of varying degrees of calculation. Harry noticed the nearly headless knight, Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, hovering near the end of the table with an expression that suggested he was rehearsing something. Percy Weasley, sitting several seats up, turned around and said, in the tone of someone who has decided to take charge of a situation, "I feel I should welcome you to Gryffindor House, Potter, and advise you that the events of the sorting, while certainly dramatic, don't actually change the day-to-day structure of school life. You'll be expected to attend all classes, follow all rules." "Percy," said one of the twins, Fred, Harry would later learn, though he couldn't tell them apart yet, if the castle just declared him its heir, maybe pump the brakes on the rule lecture. "Yeah," said the other twin, George. "The castle can probably make rules. He might be able to make rules. He might be a rule." Percy turned red and faced forward again. Harry caught the twins' eyes and grinned, and they grinned back with the easy recognition of people who have immediately identified someone as one of their own. Later, much later, after the feast, after McGonagall led them through corridors that Harry found he could feel rather than just see, a low thrumming awareness in the stones that he hadn't noticed before but couldn't now stop noticing, after climbing to Gryffindor Tower and learning the password and climbing through the portrait hole and seeing the red and gold common room for the first time, after all of that, when the other first years had gone to bed, Harry sat in a chair by the dying fire with Ron on one side and Hermione on the other, and Hermione had her copy of Hogwarts, a history open on the low table, and they read the footnote together. It wasn't much. 3 lines in small print at the bottom of a page about the founding, the tradition of the Heir of Hogwarts, a figure believed to be able to commune directly with the castle's foundational enchantments, has not been reliably documented since the 12th century. Scholars largely regard the tradition as ceremonial or apocryphal. "Someone definitely edited this," Harry said. "That's what I thought," Hermione said. "Ceremonial or apocryphal is what you write when you want people to stop asking about something. Or when you want to make sure no one comes looking," Ron said. He'd gone quiet a few seats back, in a way that had less to do with the food and more to do with something he was working through. He said, after a moment, "My mum knows about this. She mentioned it once, the heir tradition. Said it was better forgotten. Which is exactly what she says about things she thinks are too dangerous to discuss." Harry looked at the fire. The embers were going orange-red, the same color as the lines in the floor during the sorting, and he thought about the feeling he'd had when the blocks broke, not just the release of it, but the size of what was released. It hadn't felt like gaining something new. It had felt like remembering something that had always been there. "I've been blocked since before I can remember," he said. "Since before you could walk, by the look of it," Hermione said, and her voice had the careful quality of someone being precise about something they find upsetting. "The level of suppression on your magic, the hat said it couldn't see you through it. That's not a mild dampening charm. That's years of deliberate, layered work." "Someone was afraid of me," Harry said. Not a question. Not a complaint. Just something he was holding up to the light to look at. "Or afraid of what you'd become," Ron said. He was staring at the fire too. "Which isn't necessarily the same thing, is it?" Harry didn't answer that. He filed it away instead, in the part of his mind that had learned long ago to hold important things without chewing on them too soon. "Tomorrow," he said. "First thing. I want to walk the castle." "For what?" Ron asked. "I want to see if I can feel it. What they said, that I can commune with it. I want to know what that actually means." Hermione was already making notes. Outside the tall windows of Gryffindor Tower, the September night was fully dark, and the grounds of Hogwarts spread below, the lake silver-black, the forbidden forest a dark mass against the hills, the Quidditch pitch-pale under starlight. The castle around them settled, the way old buildings do in the nighttime hours, small sounds in the walls, old wood and old stone doing the slow, dignified work of existing. But there was something else. A sound underneath the settling, something Harry could feel more than hear, a low resonant presence, warm and vast and aware, like a sleeping mind turning over at the edge of waking. He placed his hand flat on the stone window ledge and he felt it pulse once, gently, under his palm. "Hello," it seemed to say. In no particular language. Not in any language at all. "Hello," Harry thought back. The fire in the hearth flared once, briefly, for no apparent reason. Ron looked at it. Looked at Harry. Decided, wisely, that this was not the moment for more conversation. "Right," he said. "I'm going to sleep." Harry sat with his hand on the stone for another minute, alone with the fire and the night and the enormous, ancient fact of what he had become, and then he stood up and went to bed as well, and slept better than he had in any bed in his entire life, because for the first time he was sleeping inside something that recognized him. Down in the staff room, well after midnight, Albus Dumbledore sat at a long table with his fingers steepled under his chin, and Professor McGonagall sat across from him with her tea going cold, and neither of them had spoken for some time. "You could have prevented it," McGonagall said finally. "Fawkes has never acted independently like that before." "Phoenixes," Dumbledore said, "by their nature, cannot be prevented from acting when they feel something unjust is occurring. And yet you were the one who placed the original suppressions." A silence. "I placed protections," Dumbledore said, quietly. "When he was an infant. The power he'd inherited, the convergence of bloodlines, was genuinely dangerous in a child with no control, no training, no family capable of guiding him. I intended to remove them when the time was appropriate." "And when was that going to be?" Another silence, longer this time. "That is a question," Dumbledore said, "I find myself unable to answer satisfactorily tonight." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment, and there was something in her expression that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow and was, in a way, worse than both. "The castle chose him, Albus." "I know. The founders named him." "I know. That is not something you can manage around. That is not something you can contain with careful planning and the right teachers in the right positions and a narrative you can guide." She picked up her cold tea, looked at it, set it down. "What happened tonight is the castle making a choice. And the castle has had 1,000 years to develop its judgment. I think we had better respect it." Dumbledore did not respond. But his eyes, usually so warm and so carefully twinkling, were quite still. Somewhere above them, in the tower, a boy with a lightning bolt scar and 11 years of caged magic finally loose in his blood slept dreamlessly, with one hand open on the pillow, and the stone beneath the floor glowed, faint as a heartbeat, in a rhythm that matched his own. The first chapter of the story of the Heir of Hogwarts was written. The rest remained to be lived. Chapter 2, The Weight of 4 Stones. Harry woke at 5 in the morning because the castle asked him to. Not in words. Not in anything as clear as a voice. It was more like the feeling of someone standing in a doorway, a presence at the edge of awareness, patient and waiting, the way light waits at the edge of a curtain before dawn. He lay still for a moment in the four-poster bed, listening to Ron's breathing from the next bed over and the distant sound of wind against the tower windows, and then he put his feet on the cold stone floor and felt the pulse of it move up through his soles and settle in his chest like a second heartbeat. He dressed quietly, didn't bother with shoes, and went out into the common room. The fire had burned down to coals. The portrait of the fat lady was snoring softly on the other side of the portrait hole. The room was all shadow and ember glow, and Harry stood in the middle of it with his eyes half closed and just listened, not with his ears, but with whatever the new thing was, the thing that had opened up last night when the blocks came down. The castle was enormous. He'd known that, of course, he'd walked through it last night, he'd seen the staircases and the corridors and the hall. But knowing the size of a thing and feeling it are completely different experiences, and what Harry felt now was the full weight and breadth of Hogwarts as a living architecture, not just stone and mortar and charm work but something genuinely conscious in the way that very old things become conscious when they have been loved and inhabited and breathed on by generations of human beings for long enough. He could feel the occupied dormitories above and below, warm clusters of sleeping students, each house with a different texture to it, Gryffindor's warmth running bold and restless even in sleep, Hufflepuff's deep and contented below ground, Ravenclaw's alert even at rest, Slytherin's cool and contained. He could feel corridors he hadn't walked yet. A room on the 7th floor that existed in a way he couldn't quite describe. It felt variable, like a word that means different things in different sentences. A stretch of wall on the 2nd floor that was thinner than it should be. Staircases that moved on schedules he somehow already understood. A lake that was part of the castle's awareness in a way that went deeper than geography. And below everything, below the dungeons, below the foundations, woven into the bedrock itself, something sealed. Something that had been waiting even longer than the castle had been waiting for him. He was still standing in the middle of the common room thinking about this when the door to the girls' dormitory opened and Hermione Granger came down the stairs already fully dressed, carrying 3 books and a notebook, and stopped short when she saw him. They looked at each other for a moment. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I could," Harry said. "The castle woke me up." She blinked. Then she sat down in the nearest chair, put her books on the table, opened her notebook, and said, "Tell me exactly what that feels like." So he did. He sat across from her in the early dark and described it as precisely as he could, the pulse in the stone, the texture of the different houses' presence, the sealed thing below, and Hermione took notes with a focus that he was already beginning to understand was simply her natural mode of being in the world, the way some people pace when they're thinking or drum their fingers when they're nervous. She thought with her hands, through the pen. "The variable room on the 7th floor," she said, not looking up. "That matches something I read. There's a legend about a room in this castle that becomes whatever you need it to be. It's been dismissed as apocryphal, but given what we established last night about things being dismissed as apocryphal, it's real," Harry said with certainty. He pressed his palm to the arm of the chair. "I can feel it from here. It's real and it's complicated. It's not just one room. It's more like a room that's many rooms and chooses which one to be." Hermione stared at him. "That's extraordinary." "It gets more extraordinary. The thing below the foundations," he paused, trying to find the right words. "It's not a room. It's not a vault, exactly. It's more like a test. Something with intention. Something that's been waiting to be triggered." "The founders mentioned trials," Hermione said immediately, flipping back 2 pages in her notebook. "Rowena Ravenclaw specifically said what has been sealed. I wrote that down. I think that was deliberate." "I think so too." The fire crackled back up on its own, warm and sudden, and they both looked at it. Harry reached out toward it idly, the way you'd reach toward a familiar animal, and the flames responded, not dramatically, just a small lean in his direction, like a dog pushing its head against a hand. "You should probably be more surprised by things," Hermione said, watching this. "I grew up making things happen without meaning to," Harry said. "This is just the same thing, but now I know what it is." By the time Ron stumbled downstairs at 7 with his hair standing in 4 different directions, Harry and Hermione had covered the table with notes, and Harry had spent an hour walking the perimeter of the common room with his hand on the wall learning the texture of Gryffindor Tower the way you learn a new instrument, carefully, with attention, discovering its range. Ron stood at the bottom of the stairs and surveyed the scene. "You've been up since," he checked the window. "Daylight. Early. Very early. Is this going to be a regular thing?" "Probably," Harry said. Ron processed this. "Fine. Is there breakfast?" There was, and they went. The corridors felt different to Harry in daylight, not less intense, but more navigable, the way a forest is different in daylight than at night. He was aware, constantly, of the pulse beneath his feet and the warmth in the walls, and twice he put his hand out to a wall as he passed and felt it return the contact, a brief recognition. Ron watched this the second time and said nothing, which Harry was beginning to understand was a specific kind of support, the support of someone who accepts things without requiring them to be explained. They arrived at the Great Hall before most of the other students, and Harry had just reached for the pumpkin juice when he became aware that someone was watching him from across the table with the specific quality of someone who had prepared what they wanted to say. Draco Malfoy sat at the Slytherin table directly opposite, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, and he looked like he'd been there for at least 10 minutes waiting. His expression was calibrated, not the sneering contempt from the Hogwarts Express, but something more careful, more considered. He'd had the night to think, Harry realized. Whatever this was, it wasn't impulsive. "Potter," Malfoy said. "Malfoy," Harry said, and poured his juice. Last night was quite the performance. Harry looked at him then, fully, the way he'd learned to look at people when they were saying something and meaning something else. It wasn't a performance. No? Malfoy's tone was very even. "For ghosts and a floor show and you end up at the Gryffindor table eating bread. Seems modest for an heir to everything. If you're waiting for me to be arrogant about it," Harry said, "you're going to wait a while." Something flickered behind Malfoy's eyes, not anger. Something more like recalibration. "My family has been at this school for generations," he said. "My father sat where I'm sitting. His father before him. The Malfoy line has been part of Slytherin House for 200 years. We've kept traditions alive that kept this school from descending into mediocrity." "That's interesting," Harry said pleasantly. "I'll keep it in mind." Malfoy's jaw tightened. "Slytherin's heir, Slytherin's ghost showed up last night," Harry said, still very pleasantly, "and said that I carry his blood. I didn't ask for that. But he seemed pretty clear about it." He picked up his toast. "Is there something specific you wanted, or is this just you establishing that we're going to have a thing?" Crabbe and Goyle looked at Malfoy. Malfoy looked at Harry. A long moment passed. "We'll have a thing," Malfoy said quietly, and went back to his breakfast. Ron, beside Harry, said nothing until Malfoy had turned away, and then leaned in and said very quietly, "He's not going to let that go." "I know," Harry said. "He expected you to either back down or get angry." "I know that too." Ron considered this. "You're more complicated than I initially gave you credit for, mate." Harry grinned. "Eat your breakfast." The morning brought classes, and classes brought the particular chaos of first years discovering that Hogwarts did not operate on the same logic as primary school. The schedule McGonagall had handed them at breakfast was dense and bewildering: transfiguration, charms, herbology, defense against the dark arts, potions, all crammed into a week that also included astronomy at midnight and history of magic with a ghost who had been teaching the same notes for 200 years. Transfiguration was first, and Professor McGonagall arrived after them, which Harry had learned was because she was already in the room, as the cat sitting on the desk at the front. She transformed in front of them without preamble, which drew the gasps she'd clearly been getting for 30 years, and then explained that transfiguration was some of the most complex magic they'd learn and anyone who misbehaved could leave. Then her eyes found Harry's and held for a moment, a different kind of look than the one she'd given him at dinner or the one she'd given Dumbledore in the staff room. Assessment. The look of someone revising their model of a situation. "Potter," she said. "You'll work from the standard curriculum in this class as with all others. The position of heir carries certain access privileges within the castle. It does not grant academic exceptions." "I wasn't expecting any, Professor," Harry said. The assessment look deepened, fractionally. She nodded once, turned to the board, and began teaching. Harry was good at transfiguration. Not just competent, actually good, in a way that became apparent about halfway through the lesson when he produced a fully transformed matchstick to needle on his second attempt and sat back to wait while everyone else worked. McGonagall noticed, said nothing immediately, but he could feel her recalibrating again throughout the session. Charms was similar. Flitwick, who was so small he stood on a pile of books, squeaked with delight when Harry's Wingardium Leviosa lifted the feather all the way to the ceiling on the first try, and then overcorrected slightly and lifted 3 other objects off nearby desks without intending to, which got a laugh from the room and an interested note in Flitwick's margins. The magic wasn't just unblocked. It was eager. It had been caged for 11 years and it wanted to run. Potions was a different kind of experience. Snape's dungeon classroom had a particular atmosphere: cold stone, pickled things in jars, low light, and a teacher who had arrived in the room already in motion, robes sweeping, with the energy of someone who has decided how this lesson is going to feel before it's begun. He took the register in the tone of a man going through a formality he finds tedious, and then he paused. "Ah," he said. "Harry Potter." And the way he said the name had nothing warm in it. "Our new celebrity." His dark eyes moved over Harry with the precision of an inventory. "I've been told the castle has declared you something rather grand. I'm sure the Stones are very impressed with you." "I'm sure they have higher standards than that, sir," Harry said. A silence dropped in the room like a stone in a well. Snape's eyes narrowed very slightly. 5 points from Gryffindor for impertinence. "For answering a rhetorical question, sir." "Potter." Snape's voice was very quiet. "Do not test me." "I'm not testing you," Harry said. He met Snape's eyes and held them, not with aggression but with a kind of steady, unconcerned directness that was somehow more unsettling than defiance would have been. "I'm just here to learn potions. I'm genuinely interested in it." Another silence. Snape stared at him for a moment with an expression Harry couldn't fully read, and he was good at reading expressions, before he turned to the board and began the lesson. The 5 points stayed off. But Snape did not take more. Hermione caught Harry's sleeve in the corridor afterward. "You can't do that every time." "Do what?" "That thing. Where you don't back down but you're also not rude. It takes enormous restraint to maintain and it'll wear you out." "It doesn't feel like restraint," Harry said honestly. "I just genuinely wasn't scared of him." Hermione opened her mouth, closed it. "That might actually be the most powerful thing about you," she said. Ron, from behind them, shook his head. "You're both deeply weird." Harry laughed, and the laugh echoed off stone that glowed, barely perceptibly, in the wake of it. It was on the 3rd day that he found the first door. He'd been walking the castle, properly walking it, not going from class to class but actually moving through it with attention, learning it the way the castle seemed to want to be learned, which was thoroughly, and he'd gone up to the 4th floor after dinner while the rest of Gryffindor was in the common room. The 4th floor corridors were quieter than the lower floors, used mostly for charms classrooms and a bathroom that was apparently haunted in an inoffensive way. He was about halfway down a corridor he hadn't been in before when he felt it. It wasn't behind a wall or beneath a painting or disguised as anything. It was simply a door that hadn't been there 2 seconds ago, as though the corridor had reassessed his presence and decided to offer him something. The door was old oak, banded with iron that had the same character as the symbols on the Great Hall floor during the sorting, and set into it at eye level was a single stone, dark green, that pulsed once when Harry looked at it. He looked left and right. Empty corridor. He put his hand on the door. It opened. The room beyond was small and circular, which was geometrically impossible given the corridor's location, and it was entirely empty except for a stone pedestal in the center and on the pedestal, 4 objects, a worn leather glove, a small iron key, a folded piece of parchment, and a chess piece, a king, carved from 4 different types of stone in 4 quadrants, each stone a different color. On the wall behind the pedestal, carved in the same script as the floor of the Great Hall, was writing. Harry couldn't read it. It wasn't English, wasn't Latin, was something older, but as he stood looking at it he felt the castle pull at his attention like a hand taking his hand, and he understood it the way he'd understood the Founder's words. Not through his eyes. Through something else. For the one who holds all 4, not given, but earned. These are the keys of knowing. Carry them, and when the time is right, the first trial will open. The castle knows when you are ready. The trial decides whether you deserve to be. Harry looked at the 4 objects for a long moment. He picked up all 4, tucked them in his robe pockets, and went back to the common room. Ron was playing chess with Neville when Harry came in, and Hermione was reading on the window seat, and the common room smelled like the fire and something warm and yeasty from the kitchen, and Harry sat down and put the 4 objects on the table and said, "Something happened." They gathered around. Hermione's reaction to the chess piece was to pick it up and turn it over very carefully, examining the 4 types of stone. He could tell it was marble, obsidian, granite, and something pale amber that she identified after a moment as fossilized wood. "This is extraordinary craftsmanship," she said. "And old. Really old." "What's the parchment?" Ron asked. Harry unfolded it. It was blank. "Blank," Ron said. "Classic." "It's not blank," Harry said, and pressed his thumb to the center of it, not knowing why, just trusting the instinct, and letters appeared, flowing across the parchment in ink that looked more like liquid amber than black, forming in a script that shifted as he looked at it, the way the carved text on the wall had shifted, until it resolved into something he could read. "The first trial is in the water. You will know when. Bring only yourself." "The lake," Ron said immediately. "That would be the logical interpretation," Hermione agreed, but her voice had the quality of someone who isn't entirely certain logic applies. "I can feel it," Harry said. "The sealed thing I mentioned this morning. The thing in the bedrock. It's connected to this. To all of this." He spread his hand over the 4 objects. "The founders built something into the structure of the castle. Something that's been waiting. And these are, I think they're the activation keys." "For trials," Hermione said. "For trials," Harry said. "One for each." Ron picked up the iron key and turned it over. It was unremarkable in appearance, small, plain, dark iron, but it had a warmth to it that wasn't temperature, and he set it down quickly with a look that suggested he'd felt something. "These are loaded," he said. "Loaded," Harry repeated. "Charged. Full of something. I've grown up around a lot of magical objects and these feel dense. Like holding a battery." Ron paused. "My dad would go absolutely mad for these." Harry closed the parchment and gathered the objects back into his pockets. The glove he'd left till last, and when he picked it up he felt something pass through him that wasn't like the castle's pulse. It was older, more directive, and for just a moment he had the distinct impression of Salazar Slytherin's dark, measuring eyes. He put the glove in his pocket with the rest. The next morning, Dumbledore summoned him. Not to the headmaster's office, to a small room off the main corridor that Harry hadn't noticed before, which probably wasn't a coincidence. The message came through McGonagall, who delivered it at breakfast with an expression that gave nothing away, and Harry said fine and went. The room had 2 armchairs and a fireplace and no desk, which Harry noted with interest. A room without a desk was a room set up for a conversation between equals, or at least for the appearance of one. Dumbledore was already seated, blue robes, half-moon glasses, the carefully constructed warmth of someone who has spent 80 years perfecting the art of being the most trustworthy person in the room. "Harry," he said. "Please, sit." Harry sat. He did not feel hostile. He felt precise. "First," Dumbledore said, "I want to say that what happened at the sorting was remarkable. And I want you to know that the school and its staff are fully committed to your well-being and your education, regardless of, Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. Dumbledore paused. "The blocks on my magic," Harry said. "You put them there." A brief silence. Just a beat, barely perceptible, in the rhythm of Dumbledore's careful ease. "Then, the suppressions I placed were placed without my knowledge, without my consent, and without telling my parents, because my parents weren't alive to ask." Harry said it calmly, the way you state a fact in an equation, without heat, but without room for revision either. I'm not angry about it. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking you to tell me why. Dumbledore looked at him across the firelight for a long moment, and whatever he'd been expecting this 11-year-old boy to be, it was evidently not this. His expression didn't change much, it was too expert for that, but something behind it shifted. You were an infant, Dumbledore said, with power beyond your ability to control, in a household that was entirely unequipped to manage magical expression of any kind. The most immediate concern was your safety. And the less immediate concern? Another pause. The prophecy, Dumbledore said quietly, requires a great deal of careful navigation. The prophecy that says I have to face Voldemort, Harry said. I know about it. Hagrid told me enough, and I filled in the rest. Dumbledore's expression shifted properly now, into something that was genuine surprise, genuine reconsideration. You've been thinking about this for some time. Since I found out I was a wizard, I've been thinking about all of it, Harry said. Because I spent 11 years in a house where nobody told me anything, and the one thing that teaches you very early is that people who don't tell you things are managing you. And I'm done being managed. He met Dumbledore's eyes, those ancient, bright eyes that had seen more centuries than Harry had seen years, and held them without blinking. I'm not your weapon. I'm not a chess piece. I'm the heir of Hogwarts, which apparently means this castle is partly my responsibility, and I intend to take that seriously. I'd like to do that with your support. But I'll do it without it if I have to. The fire popped. Somewhere outside, a bird, Fawkes, probably, in a tower above, let out a short, bright note. Dumbledore sat very still for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed, very softly, and the laugh was genuine too. Your father, he said, was not remotely this organized at your age. Your mother, on the other hand, he stopped. Something passed across his face that was old and painful and honest. She would have liked this very much. Harry said nothing, but something in his chest moved. I will not manage you, Dumbledore said. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and for a moment he looked less like a headmaster and more like what he actually was, a very old man who had made very large mistakes and was trying to decide how to do better. I will tell you, instead, that there is a presence in this castle that is not mine to manage, an evil that has been here since before you arrived, wearing a face I trust professionally and hiding behind that trust. I had intended to handle it quietly. Before you were involved. Harry thought about the sealed thing in the bedrock. About the trials. About the quality of attention he'd felt from below. He thought about Professor Quirrell, who had shaken Harry's hand at the leaky cauldron and whose turban smelled of garlic and whose stutter had a quality of performance about it that Harry's finely tuned instincts had flagged immediately and filed for later. I know what you're talking about, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. I'll handle it, Harry said. Harry, not alone, Harry said. Not immediately. When the time is right. The castle told me when. He stood up, and the firelight threw his shadow long across the floor. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss? Dumbledore looked at him for one long, complicated moment. Yes, he said. One thing. Whatever you found on the 4th floor, and I know you found it, because the castle tells me certain things even now, be careful. The Founder's trials were designed for a fully trained adult witch or wizard. You are 11 years old. I was 11 years old when my parents died for me, Harry said. Not bitterly. Not for effect. Just as another fact. The castle thinks I'm ready, or it wouldn't have opened the door. He went back to breakfast. The three of them, Harry, Ron, Hermione, had developed a rhythm by the end of the first week that felt less like friendship forming and more like friendship recognizing itself, the way sometimes you meet someone and the friendship isn't built so much as remembered, and the time before it feels thin and provisional in retrospect. They worked together in the evenings, Hermione providing research depth, Ron providing strategic instinct and a deadpan humor that cut through tension at exactly the right moments, and Harry providing the increasingly unnerving capacity to do complex magic without appearing to try very hard. "You're not studying enough," Hermione said Thursday evening, watching Harry produce a perfect Lumos on his first attempt. "I'm practicing plenty," Harry said mildly. "Practicing and studying are different. You need the theory." "I know the theory. I can feel it." Hermione made the face she made when she was trying to decide whether something was intellectually honest or just convenient. "You can feel the theory of charms?" "When Flitwick explained the wand movement geometry today, I could feel the way the movement connects to the spell structure, like it's a physical logic. Like the wand is a translator and the motion is the sentence." He paused. "That sounds mad, doesn't it?" "It sounds like wandless magic theory," Hermione said very quietly, looking at him with an expression she hadn't worn before. "Which is, not first-year material. That's not even, most adult witches and wizards can't access wandless theory intuitively." "I think the blocks were suppressing it," Harry said. "All of it. Every instinct, every connection, everything. And now it's free," Ron said, from behind his exploding snap cards. He looked up. "Reckon you could do magic without the wand?" Harry looked at his wand, lying on the table. Then at the empty goblet across the room. He reached toward it, not with his hand, just with his attention, the same quality of attention he used with the castle, the awareness that was becoming as natural as breath, and the goblet rose 3 inches off the table and hung there, perfectly steady. Hermione stared at it. Harry let it down gently. "Right," Ron said. "So that's a yes, then." "Don't tell anyone," Harry said, not because he was ashamed of it or afraid, but because he was thinking about Dumbledore's chess metaphor and the difference between showing all your pieces and playing well. Some information was worth keeping close, not out of fear, but out of respect for good strategy. Hermione nodded with the precision of someone filing something in a very secure mental folder. Ron said, "Obviously." Outside the window, the September sky was turning toward its first real autumn, the air coming off the lake with a sharpness that meant the season was shifting. In the dungeons, Draco Malfoy sat at his desk and wrote a letter to his father that was carefully worded and deeply informative, because he had been raised to be careful about what he put in writing but also to understand the value of information moving quickly to people who knew how to use it. At the staff table, Quirrell ate his dinner mechanically and thought in a voice that wasn't quite his own about patience, and timing, and a stone that existed somewhere in this castle that could restore something that had been denied for 10 years. And in the walls of Hogwarts, in the deep pulse of the stones, something that had been asleep for a very long time continued its slow, patient waking, not alarmed, not urgent, but settling into a new rhythm. The rhythm of the boy who had finally come home. 3 more doors were waiting on floors he hadn't found yet. The first trial was in the water. Harry looked out the window at the black mirror of the lake and thought, not yet. Not because he was afraid of it. Because he was learning to read the castle's timing, its sense of when, and the lake was telling him the same thing the bedrock was telling him, the same thing the trial parchment had told him. "I will know when." He turned back to the common room, back to Ron and Hermione and the warm fire, and filed the lake away in the same place he filed everything important, and waited with the patience of someone who has learned that the right moment is worth more than any number of early ones. Chapter 3, What the Castle Remembers. The lake came for him on a Tuesday. Harry was in the middle of breakfast, halfway through his eggs. Ron was arguing with Seamus about the Chudley cannons, Hermione had a charms textbook propped against the pumpkin juice, when the castle's pulse changed. Not dramatically. Not the floor lighting, ghost-summoning spectacle of the sorting. It was quieter than that, more personal, the way a change in someone's breathing is quiet but completely unmistakable when you're paying attention. It felt like a door opening somewhere below him. Harry put down his fork. "Now," he said. Ron stopped mid-sentence. Hermione looked up from her book. They'd both gotten good, in the space of 9 days, at reading Harry's versions of Now, the one that meant something's happening versus the one that meant I want to tell you something versus the one that meant we should probably leave this corridor. This was the first kind. The lake, Hermione said. Yeah. You have herbology in an hour. I know. Harry pushed back from the bench. I'll be back before then. Ron stood up automatically. I'm coming. The parchment said bring only yourself. Ron sat back down. The look on his face was the specific look of someone accepting a thing they don't like because they've decided trust matters more than anxiety. Right. Be careful. Whatever that means when the founders are involved. Harry went. The September morning was sharp and clean, the kind of autumn air that makes everything look drawn with a harder line than usual, the ground's vivid green, the lake silver black, the edge of the forbidden forest dark against a pale sky. He crossed the lawn without running, without hurrying, because whatever was waiting in the water had been waiting for 1,000 years and wouldn't be impatient now. He reached the edge of the lake and stopped. The water was absolutely still. No wind touched it here, though he could feel the wind on his face and hear it in the trees at the forest edge. A circle of calm perhaps 20 feet across, and at the center of it, a few feet below the surface, something was glowing, deep amber, the exact color of the symbols in the great hall floor, pulsing in a rhythm he recognized the way you recognize your own name. Harry took off his shoes and socks, set them neatly on a rock, and walked into the lake. The cold hit him like a physical fact. The lake bed was smooth stone underfoot, slightly sloped, and he walked forward until the water was at his knees, then his waist, then his chest, and then he took a breath and went under. The underwater world of the Hogwarts lake was not what he expected. He'd assumed murk, dark water, poor visibility, the ambiguous shapes of whatever lived in it moving at the edges of sight. Instead, the water around the glowing center was clear in a way that felt deliberate, magically maintained, and the amber light below him was close enough now to illuminate the lake bed fully. It was a door. Set flat into the stone of the lake bed, the same iron-banded oak as the door on the 4th floor, but circular rather than rectangular, and carved with the same interlocking symbols. The chess piece in his pocket was suddenly warm against his thigh through the fabric of his robes, impractical clothes to swim in, he thought distantly, and then the thought dissolved because the door was opening. Not outward, toward him. Inward, downward, swinging open into a space that shouldn't exist below the lake bed, a room below the lake, and the amber light poured upward through the open door like water finding its level. Harry went through. The room on the other side was dry. Immediately, completely dry, his robes and hair were soaked for exactly the 2 seconds it took him to pass through the door, and then the water simply wasn't on him anymore, as though the room had decided not to accommodate it. He stood on a stone floor and breathed, and the door above him swung shut, and the amber light settled into the walls themselves, and he was in a chamber. It was roughly spherical, the walls curving overhead to a high point directly above him, and the entire surface, walls, ceiling, floor, was carved. Not decorated. Carved, every inch covered in script and symbol and image, layer on layer, the accumulated work of 4 minds over, he could feel it, a very long time. The images were of a school being built. Not drawn but told, the way tapestries tell stories, and the story moved around the room chronologically, stone by stone, wall by wall, for figures working together, then arguing, then working again, and in the argument scenes Harry could see the quality of their disagreement. It was not contempt but conviction, each of them believing something essential and refusing to abandon it. In the center of the room, standing in a ring of light that came from nowhere obvious, was a version of the castle. A model, a perfect stone replica of Hogwarts as it had been at its founding, every tower and courtyard exact, perhaps 3 feet tall, set on a low plinth. And standing around it, one at each cardinal point, were 4 figures. Not ghosts. Not quite. They were made of light and intention rather than the translucent substance of ghosts, more vivid, more present, and when they turned to look at him it was with the full directed attention of people who have been waiting specifically for him. Gryffindor was to his left. Ravenclaw to his right. Hufflepuff directly opposite, warm and steady. Slytherin directly before him. "You came alone," Slytherin said. Not an accusation. An observation, with something in it like approval. "The parchment said to," Harry said. "The parchment said you would know when," Ravenclaw corrected. "You were also told to bring only yourself." Both conditions were met. But the second is the more important one. She tilted her head. "Do you understand why?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Because whatever this is can only be assessed by me. Not by how I perform in front of other people. What I am when nobody else is watching." "Not quite," Gryffindor said, but he was smiling. "What you decide when the decision costs something. The first trial," Helga said, "is the trial of memory. It is the trial I designed, and I will tell you plainly what it is. You will be shown a memory. Not yours. Ours, a memory from the founding, a true one, one that has been sealed in this room for 1,000 years and never shown to anyone. And you must decide, honestly and without knowing how the decision will be received, what you think of it." Harry looked at her. "That's it? I just have to say what I think?" "Everyone believes they can do that," Helga said gently. "Almost no one can. What we are testing is whether you can hold the truth of what you see without adjusting it to match what you want to believe, or what you think we want to hear." "What you see may be uncomfortable," Slytherin said. "It involves me." That was enough preparation. Harry nodded. The model in the center of the room lit up, the amber light brightening, and then the room around it dissolved. He was still in the chamber, he knew that, he could feel the stone under his feet, but what he was seeing was somewhere else. A version of Hogwarts mid-construction, one tower finished and one begun, the grounds raw earth and scaffolding, and 4 people in working clothes arguing in a courtyard in a way that had escalated well beyond academic disagreement. The argument was about the Muggle-born students. 3 of the 4 founders wanted to recruit openly, to send letters, to find every child with magical ability regardless of parentage, to build a school that was genuinely inclusive in a way the magical world had never attempted. The 4th, Salazar Slytherin, did not want this. Harry watched Slytherin argue. And what struck him, watching, was that the argument was not the simple hatred of Muggle-borns that the legend had preserved. It was something more complicated and, in a way, more troubling. Slytherin was afraid. Not of Muggle-born students specifically, he was afraid of exposure. The wizarding world, in the time of the founding, was genuinely persecuted, hunted in ways that had left generational scars in the community, and Slytherin's position was that bringing in students who had one foot in the Muggle world was an unacceptable security risk, that secrecy was survival, that the school would be discovered and destroyed. He was wrong. Harry could see that too, could see the flaw in the argument, which was that isolation doesn't protect, it just delays and weakens. But he was not a cartoon villain. He was a man who had survived something terrible and had drawn the wrong lesson from it, which was not the same thing. The argument ended with him leaving. With Gryffindor's face, angry and grieving. With Ravenclaw's face, cold and exhausted. With Helga's face, which was the face of someone who loves people who are hurting each other and can't stop either of them. And then, before he left, Slytherin stopped and turned back. He looked at the unfinished castle, at the tower he'd built, at the foundation stones he'd laid, at the dormitories carved into rock below the lake. And he said, to no one in particular, or perhaps to the castle itself, if the one who can carry all 4 comes, they will have my blessing, whatever I have failed to deserve. The vision ended. Harry stood in the chamber with the 4 light figures watching him. The silence lasted several seconds. "What do you think?" Helga asked. "He was wrong," Harry said. "His reasoning was driven by fear, and fear is a terrible architect, it builds walls when it should be building doors. But he wasn't wrong in the way the stories say he was wrong. He wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake." He paused. He was a person who had been hurt and responded to that hurt in a way that ended up hurting other people. That's not evil. That's just human. And it's sadder than evil, in a way, because it was fixable, and it didn't get fixed. No one said anything. The thing he built here, Harry said, gesturing to the chamber around them, this wasn't guilt. This was hope. He built this place and left that message because some part of him understood that he'd gotten it wrong, even if he couldn't go back. He met Slytherin's light figure eyes. I think that took more than the stories give him credit for. Slytherin was quiet for a long moment. No one, he said finally, has said that before. In the occasions that this chamber has been, he stopped. You are the first to reach this room, boy. In 1,000 years. But if others had reached it, I think they would have said I was a monster, or they would have tried to excuse everything, which is also a kind of dishonesty. He looked at Harry with something that was not quite peace but was leaning toward it. You said neither. I said what I actually think, Harry said. That's what the trial was testing, right? Not whether I'd be kind or harsh, but whether I'd be honest. Yes, Rowena said, and her voice was warm in a way that didn't come naturally to her, Harry suspected, but was entirely genuine. That is precisely it. The plinth in the center of the room changed. The model of the castle shifted, one small section of it lit up brighter than the rest, and Harry leaned in and looked and saw that it was a tower, the one Slytherin had built first, and set into the base of the model tower was a small dark green stone. The first key, Gryffindor said. Not the one you carry. The one you've earned. Take it. Harry reached out and lifted the stone from the model. It was warm in his palm, and the moment he held it the symbols on the walls of the chamber pulsed once, and he felt something, not in his chest this time, but in his mind. A door opening in his mind, a small one, a crack of light through something that had been sealed. He understood, suddenly, that there were memories in the castle. Not just his ability to feel it and hear it. Actual memories, events, moments, centuries of things witnessed and held in the stone, accessible now, the way a library is accessible when someone finally hands you the key. The light figures were already fading, their purpose here completed. 3 more, Ravenclaw said, as she dimmed. In time. The castle will tell you. What do they test? Harry asked. The second is courage, Gryffindor said, already half gone. The third is wisdom. The fourth, his voice was the last thing to fade, and there was something in it that might have been a laugh, the fourth is Helga's. And I always found hers the hardest. What does it test? Harry called after the last of the light. Worth, Helga's voice said, from nowhere and everywhere. Whether you believe you deserve what you've been given. And then they were gone. Harry stood alone in the chamber with the green stone in his palm and the vast memory of the castle opening at the edge of his mind like a horizon, and he breathed, once, deeply, and then he found the door, it was in the floor again, and the lake was above him, and he went back up through the cold dark water and broke the surface in the circle of still lake and walked back to shore. He was back at the castle before herbology. Ron met him at the entrance hall with the expression of someone who has been stationary for an hour under significant tension. Well? I'll tell you everything, Harry said. After class. Both of you. You're soaking, Ron observed. Yeah. Harry looked down at his thoroughly wet robes. Trial was in the lake. As advertised. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Right. Library after herbology. Library after herbology. Professor Sprout turned out to be completely untroubled by Harry's damp state, which said something either about her character or her prior experience with students. Herbology was in the greenhouses, warm and rich-smelling, the satisfying chaos of plants that had opinions about being handled, and Harry found he liked it, the directness of it, the way the plants communicated purely through growth and texture and chemical, no layers of intention or social performance, just organisms doing what they were designed to do. He had his hands in a pot of devil's snare, Sprout was having them practice identification, not yet knowing that a future version of this lesson would matter enormously, when Neville Longbottom, beside him, said quietly, "You weren't at breakfast properly this morning." "I had somewhere to be," Harry said. Neville nodded. He had the quality, Harry had noticed, of someone who accepts things without requiring explanation, but whose acceptance was different from Ron's comfortable trust. It was more fragile, built over long experience of being the one who asks questions and gets told it's nothing. "Must be strange," Neville said, "knowing the castle's yours." "Sort of." "Strange isn't the word I'd use," Harry said. He thought about it. "It feels like having a very large, very old friend. One who knows things and is slowly explaining them." Neville looked at the devil's snare in his pot. "My gran says the Longbottom family has been herbology specialists at Hogwarts since the 1600s. She says if anyone belongs to this castle, it's us." He paused. "She didn't mean it in competition with you. She meant it as, we've been here a long time and we like it." "That's exactly what the castle needs," Harry said. "People who like it. Who care about it." Neville looked at him sideways, checking for condescension, finding none. He nodded and went back to his plant, and something in his shoulders was slightly less tight than it had been. That evening in the library, Harry told them about the chamber. He told them carefully and completely, including the part about Slytherin that he suspected many people would find uncomfortable, the nuance of it, the fear versus malice distinction, the final act of building hope into the bedrock of a school he'd abandoned in anger. Hermione took notes with the intensity of someone cataloging a primary historical source. Ron listened without interruption, which for Ron was something. "The memory access," Hermione said when he finished, leaning forward with her elbows on the table. "The crack of light thing when you took the stone. Can you use it? Can you access the castle's memories deliberately?" "I think it's going to take practice," Harry said. "It's like having a library and knowing where the general section is. But not the cataloging system yet." "Try something specific," Ron said. "Try something from this year. Something the castle would have witnessed. Hagrid's gamekeeper cabin, I don't know, try to see if there's a memory of Hagrid's cabin." Harry closed his eyes. It felt like reaching through something thick, the way your hand looks distorted reaching into deep water, but with concentration rather than physical effort, and then, there. Not a visual memory, exactly, more like an impression, a texture of place, warm yellow lamplight and the smell of something cooking and a large pair of boots by the door, and very distantly, the back of a familiar enormous shape through what might have been a window. "Got something," Harry said without opening his eyes. "Hagrid's place. It's fragmentary. Like looking through frosted glass." "Anything useful?" Hermione said. "I can tell he's there. I can tell he's talking to someone." Harry opened his eyes. "It gets clearer with proximity, I think. Or with practice. Or both." Hermione wrote something. Then she looked up with the expression she wore when she was about to say something she'd been holding for a while. "The Heir of Hogwarts having access to the castle's memories," she said carefully. That's an enormous amount of information. About students. About staff. About things that happen in this building. I'm not going to spy on people," Harry said. "I know that. I'm not suggesting you would. I'm suggesting that other people are going to think you could. Which is its own kind of power, and its own kind of problem." Harry considered this. "You're right. I usually am," Hermione said, "but not unkindly." "We should be careful about who knows the extent of it," Ron said. He was looking at his chess set, which he'd brought from the tower, absently rearranging pieces. "Dumbledore knows some of it. Malfoy suspects things. My brothers," he paused. "Fred and George know things about this castle that they absolutely shouldn't, which means information leaks in all directions. I'd keep the memory access quiet." "Agreed," Harry said. 2 days later, Malfoy made his move. It was in the corridors after dinner, not in the Great Hall, not in class, but in a stretch of corridor between the main staircase and Gryffindor Tower where the traffic had thinned to the end of evening stragglers. Harry and Ron and Hermione were walking back from the library when Malfoy stepped out of a side corridor with Crabbe, Goyle, and, which was new, 3 Slytherin third years, older boys with the look of people who had been specifically recruited for a purpose. "Potter," Malfoy said. "I've been thinking about what you said at breakfast." "I said quite a few things at breakfast," Harry said without slowing down. "You'll have to narrow it down." "The blood claim," Malfoy said. "Slytherin's blood." "You said you carry it." "The Founder's ghost said I carry it," Harry said. "I was just repeating the information." "The Malfoy family has documented lineage to Salazar Slytherin through the maternal line," Malfoy said, and his voice had the quality of something rehearsed, not nervously, but carefully, the way a legal argument is rehearsed. 3 direct descents over 8 generations. My father has had genealogists verify it." Harry stopped walking. He turned to face Malfoy, and for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other in the corridor, first years of 11 years old who were somehow already having a conversation that had the weight of centuries of institutional politics behind it. "All right," Harry said. "My family's claim to Slytherin's legacy, Draco," Harry said. Malfoy stopped. Harry almost never used people's first names. He filed names away and used them deliberately, and the deliberateness of it created a different quality of attention. Malfoy noticed. He'd been raised by someone expert in social leverage, and he recognized the weight of a deliberate thing even when he didn't expect to. "I'm not interested in competing with your family," Harry said. "I'm not trying to take anything from you." The Founders didn't appear to announce a hierarchy of who matters most. They appeared because the castle called them. He paused. "But I'll be honest with you, because I think you're smart enough to appreciate honesty. If you're planning to spend this year trying to challenge something that was set in motion before either of us was born, you're going to use up a lot of energy on something that doesn't change." The 3 third years looked at each other. Malfoy's jaw was tight. "My father," Malfoy said quietly, "is going to have questions about what happened at the sorting." "I'm sure he will," Harry said. "I look forward to meeting him and answering them." He said it completely straight, no irony, no hostility, and it was so unexpected in tone that it landed harder than aggression would have. "Are we done?" Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. The third years behind him were, Harry noticed, suddenly less certain about why they were there. "For tonight," Malfoy said. "Good," Harry said, and walked on. Ron waited until they were around the corner. "That was either very clever or is going to come back to us badly." "Probably both," Harry admitted. "You said you look forward to meeting his father," Hermione said, with the tone of someone reviewing unexpected data. "You meant that." "I did. I want to know what he's actually after." "The best way to know what someone wants is to let them tell you. And Lucius Malfoy strikes me as someone who has spent so long being the most powerful person in rooms that he's gone out of practice at hiding what he wants." "Where do you get that from?" Ron said. "You've never met him." "The way Draco talks about him," Harry said. "The amount of 'my father says' in every conversation. That much reference to a parent from someone that proud usually means the parent casts a very large shadow. And people who cast large shadows tend to believe in their own authority more than they should." He paused. "My uncle was the same way." They climbed through the portrait hole into the common room's warmth, and the evening settled into the usual texture of homework and conversation and the fire doing its good reliable work, and Harry sat with his palm on the stone arm of his chair and felt the castle around him, the sleeping students above, the cold corridors below, the lake outside in the dark, the sealed thing in the bedrock that had one key now instead of none. He pulled the dark green stone out of his pocket and set it on the table. In the firelight it looked like a deep forest, colors shifting in its depths. "3 more," Hermione said, looking at it. "3 more," Harry agreed. Courage, wisdom, worth, Ron said, ticking them off. I'm slightly concerned about worth. Helga seemed very gentle about it in a way that suggested it's going to be the worst one. Probably, Harry said, and picked the stone back up. But that's later. What's now? Hermione asked. Harry thought about the castle's memories. About the crack of light that was slowly widening, carefully widening, with each day that passed and each practice session in the quiet of early morning. He thought about what he'd felt when he'd reached for Hagrid's cabin, the warm lamplight, the familiar enormous shape. And then, at the edge of that memory, something else, something he hadn't mentioned to Hermione and Ron yet. A second figure, smaller, wearing robes that Harry couldn't quite see. Sitting across from Hagrid in the warm lamplight, and the quality of their posture was furtive. The quality of someone having a conversation they would not want witnessed. The voice, barely audible through the frosted glass distance of the castle's memory, saying one word. Fluffy. There's something in the castle, Harry said. Something that shouldn't be here. Or, something that was put here very recently, which might mean the same thing. Hermione and Ron looked at him. I'm not sure yet, Harry said. I need to look more carefully. He put the stone away. But I think someone brought something dangerous into this building, and I think I need to understand what it is before whatever it is decides to be relevant. Relevant, Ron said. You mean relevant as in dangerous to us relevant, or relevant as in the castle's going to ask you to deal with it relevant? Harry looked at him. Both, Ron said. Right. Of course. Both. Get some sleep, Harry said. Tomorrow I want to check the third-floor corridor. McGonagall said that corridor is forbidden to everyone. Harry looked at him again. Right, Ron said. Never mind. 3-floor corridor tomorrow. I'll get the chess set. Hermione looked at the ceiling in the manner of someone invoking patience from a higher power. You're going to bring a chess set. It's lucky, Ron said firmly. It's chess pieces and a board. Lucky chess pieces and a board, Ron said, and gathered his things and went up to bed, and the common room went quiet, and Harry sat alone with the fire for a few minutes, one hand on the stone, listening to the castle breathe. The memory from Hagrid's cabin was still there at the edge of his mind, the lamplight, the furtive posture, the one word floating up out of the past. Fluffy. Something with 3 heads, Harry thought, and pressed his fingers gently into the stone. The stone pulsed back. Yes, it seemed to say. Something with 3 heads. He went to bed, and in the morning the September sky was clear and cold and full of promise, and the castle waited, warm and patient and vast, for whatever came next. Chapter 4, The Ministry Comes Calling. The letter arrived on a Friday. Harry knew it was coming before the owl landed, felt it in the castle's pulse the way you feel weather changing before the clouds arrive, a subtle shift in the quality of the morning, something bracing itself. The great hall was at its usual Friday breakfast volume when the post owls came through the high windows in their usual stream, and most of them went to their usual recipients, and then one owl, large, official-looking, wearing the unmistakable air of government correspondence, flew a very deliberate line to the staff table and landed in front of Dumbledore. Dumbledore read the letter with an expression that revealed nothing and then looked down the table at McGonagall, who looked back at him with an expression that revealed slightly more, resignation, the particular kind that comes from having expected something and not being pleased to be right. Harry watched this exchange from the Gryffindor table, read it accurately, and went back to his eggs. Ministry? Ron asked, not looking up from his toast. Ministry, Harry confirmed. How do you know? Dumbledore's doing the face he does when the situation has just become more complicated in a specific, bureaucratic way. Harry picked up his pumpkin juice. Also, the owl had a ministry seal on the envelope. Ron looked at the staff table, confirming. Right. He considered this for a moment. How soon? Today or tomorrow, Harry said. They'll want to move quickly. Something like the sorting night, That kind of information spreading through the wizarding world, they'll want to get ahead of it. Hermione set her book down. She'd been listening without appearing to. They don't have jurisdiction over Hogwarts, she said. The school operates under its own charter. The ministry can't compel the headmaster to. They're not coming to compel, Harry said. They're coming to assess. To see what they're dealing with. Assessment and control are different things, but they lead to the same place if you let them. He looked at the staff table again. Dumbledore had folded the letter and was now talking to Professor Flitwick with the demeanor of a man who had already composed several responses and was selecting between them. They'll want to examine me. Probably run some diagnostic spells, ask some questions, try to establish some kind of official framework for what the heir title means in legal terms. Can they do that? Neville asked from further down the bench. He'd been close enough to catch the conversation and had leaned in with the careful quietness of someone who has learned that the best way to stay in important conversations is to ask questions rather than make statements. They can try, Harry said. McGonagall came for him after breakfast, before he'd had time to go anywhere interesting, with the expression of someone who would rather be delivering a different message. The ministry has requested a meeting, she said, when they'd stepped into a side corridor. A delegation. This afternoon. In the headmaster's office. Who's coming? McGonagall paused, a brief one, but Harry clocked it. Cornelius Fudge, she said, the Minister for Magic, and 2 senior advisors from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. And a representative from the Office for the Classification of Magical Events, which is the department that handles unprecedented magical occurrences, Harry finished. Yes. She looked at him with the assessment quality that was becoming, he thought, a kind of habit between them. Harry. I want to prepare you for the fact that the ministry's interest in you is not benevolent, Harry said. I know. They're not frightened of what I can do, exactly, or not yet. They're frightened of what I represent, which is a power in the wizarding world that isn't subject to their structure. He met her eyes. I'm not going to be rude to them. I'm not going to be hostile. But I'm not going to let them establish authority over something that isn't theirs to govern. McGonagall looked at him for a moment that stretched slightly past the professional. Your mother, she said, argued with the ministry about magical law when she was 15. She had a gift for making correct arguments sound inevitable. She paused. This afternoon, then. 2 o'clock. Harry nodded. McGonagall turned to go, then stopped. Harry. Whatever you're going to say to them, and I suspect it will be quite a lot, try to leave them their dignity. Cornered bureaucrats are more dangerous than honest opponents. I know, Harry said. I was raised by one. She left, and Harry stood in the corridor for a moment, one hand on the wall, and the castle pulsed under his palm with something that felt, unmistakably, like anticipation. He spent the morning deliberately. Charms with Flitwick, where he made himself work at a standard pace and contain what he could do, not out of fear of showing it but out of practice for exactly the kind of meeting he had coming up, the discipline of choosing what to reveal, which was a different thing entirely from hiding. Defense against the dark arts with Quirrell, where he watched the man's performance of nervousness with fresh eyes and found it, this morning, thin in specific places. Quirrell's stutter disappeared for exactly 0.3 seconds when he was writing on the board and thought the class wasn't watching. His hands, when he handled the textbook, were steadier than they should be for someone with that level of apparent anxiety. And the turban, Harry had been thinking about the turban since Diagon Alley, the smell of it, and the castle's low specific discomfort whenever Quirrell was in the building, like a stone with something trapped under it. After class he held back. Professor Quirrell, he said, while the other students filed out. The section on counterjinxes in Chapter 4, you moved past it quickly. Can you tell me more about the theory behind them? Quirrell turned from the board. The stutter arrived on schedule. Of C-course, Potter. The T-theory is, particularly the way a sufficiently strong counterjinx can penetrate a host-based defense, Harry said, watching Quirrell's face. I was reading ahead. It mentioned that certain dark presences use a human host to avoid direct magical exposure. The room went very still. Quirrell's face did something complicated. The stutter mechanism failed entirely for 2 full seconds. In those 2 seconds Harry saw something behind the man's eyes that was not Quirrell, something older and colder and looking at Harry with a focus that was entirely unperformed. Then the stutter came back, and Quirrell laughed nervously, and said, "A very advanced topic for a first year, Potter. Perhaps stick to the curriculum for now." "Of course," Harry said pleasantly. "Thank you, Professor." He went out into the corridor and stood for a moment with his back against the stone wall, letting what he just confirmed settle into the folder in his mind where he kept important things, next to Fluffy and the sealed thing in the bedrock and Dumbledore's recalculation face. Voldemort was in the castle. On the back of the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's head, if Harry's reading of the architecture of that particular deception was correct. Not a crisis, not yet. A variable. One he was going to manage at the right time, in the right way, on his own terms. He went to lunch. "You look like you found something out," Ron said, handing him the bread. "I did," Harry said. "Are you going to tell us?" "Yes. After the ministry meeting." Ron looked at him. "How are you this calm about everything?" Harry considered this honestly. "I think when you grow up with very little that's yours," he said, "you get good at assessing what matters and what doesn't, and not wasting energy on the things that don't. Everything the Dursleys used to try to frighten me with, the threats, the rules, the punishments, I learned to evaluate each one. Is this actually dangerous, or is this just someone exercising power because they can? Most of it was the second one, and the second one, once you identify it, isn't frightening." He picked up his pumpkin juice. "The ministry coming to assess me is the second one." Hermione was looking at him with the expression she wore when she was revising her model of something. "That's either very healthy or very concerning," she said. "Could be both," Harry allowed. At 2 o'clock he knocked on the headmaster's office door. Dumbledore's office was circular and crammed with the accumulated evidence of a very long career: silver instruments, paintings of sleeping headmasters, a large desk position to allow the occupant to receive visitors from a position of gentle authority. Fawkes was on his stand near the window, and when Harry came in the Phoenix looked at him and made a soft sound like a single bell note, which Harry answered by meeting his eyes for a moment. 3 people he didn't know were in the room along with Dumbledore. The first was a small, round man in lime green robes who was perspiring slightly despite the autumn cool and wearing an expression of professional warmth that covered something more anxious underneath. This was Cornelius Fudge, and Harry knew immediately that he was someone who cared deeply about how things looked and not very much about what they were. Behind him stood a tall witch with the bearing of someone in law enforcement, straight back, assessing eyes, a quill already out, who Harry learned was Madame Millicent Bagnold's deputy, Dolores Umbridge supervisor for magical law enforcement, a woman named Karina Vance. The third was a small, precise man from the Office for the Classification of Magical Events named Bertrand Crouch, no relation to Bartemius, who had the quality of someone deeply invested in making the unprecedented fit into existing categories. "Ah," said Fudge, when Harry came in. "Harry Potter." He said it with the air of someone greeting a celebrity he's slightly nervous about, which was a specific kind of obsequiousness that Harry found less comfortable than straightforward hostility. "My dear boy, what a remarkable few weeks you've had." "Good afternoon, Minister," Harry said. He shook the offered hand and sat in the chair Dumbledore indicated, across from the ministry representatives, Dumbledore at his desk to the side, positioned not quite neutrally between them. "Thank you for coming." Of course," Fudge said, settling into his chair. "The ministry has a responsibility to be aware of significant magical events. And what occurred at the sorting certainly qualifies." "I'd imagine so," Harry said. "We've spoken with the headmaster about the nature of the declaration made by the Founder's manifestations, and we've reviewed what historical records exist about the Heir of Hogwarts tradition, and we'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's all right." "That's fine," Harry said. Vance leaned forward. She had the quality of someone who preferred directness and was slightly impatient with Fudge's cushioning. "Mr. Potter." The Heir of Hogwarts title, as it appears to have been conferred, carries, according to the sources we've reviewed, certain authorities within the castle's magical structure. Access to sealed areas, command over certain enchantments, a form of administrative oversight that exists outside the normal institutional hierarchy. She said the last part carefully. "Can you describe your current experience of that authority?" "I can feel the castle," Harry said. "Its spaces, its inhabitants in a general sense. I can tell where people are in a rough way. I can access areas that weren't previously accessible. I can communicate with it, in a limited but growing way." He paused. "I've also been given access to the Founder's trial chambers, which are sealed beneath the castle's structure and have never been opened before." A silence. Crouch's quill was moving rapidly. "The trials," Fudge said. "Right. Yes. And have you entered one of these?" "The first one, yes." "And what did you find?" "A memory from the founding period," Harry said. "Historical information. A test of judgment." "What kind of test?" Vance asked. "Whether I can hold an accurate view of something uncomfortable rather than adjusting it to be more convenient." He looked at her steadily. "I passed." Fudge cleared his throat. "The Ministry's position, and I want to be very clear that we're approaching this with full respect for the school's charter, which is inviolable, absolutely inviolable, but our position is that an authority of this nature, operating within British magical territory, should be formalized. Recognized. Brought into the existing." "No," Harry said. Fudge stopped mid-sentence. "I'm sorry," he said. "No," Harry said again, with precisely the same tone. Not heated. Not challenging. The tone of someone stating a clear fact. The Heir of Hogwarts authority predates the Ministry of Magic by approximately 700 years. It was established by the founders in the castle's foundational magic, which is the oldest intentional magical architecture in Britain. The Ministry's jurisdiction in matters of magical law derives from agreements made between the wizarding community in the 17th century, agreements which explicitly preserved Hogwarts' independence as a self-governing institution. He watched Fudge's face during this and noted with interest that the professional warmth was starting to crack under the pressure of not expecting to be cited at. Formalizing this within your existing framework would require the Ministry to establish that the Founder's original charter is superseded by later legislation. To my knowledge, no such claim has ever been successfully argued, and I think attempting it now would create a legal situation you'd find awkward. Crouch had stopped writing. He was looking at Harry with an expression that had migrated from professional to something considerably more personal. "You're 11 years old," he said. "I'm the Heir of Hogwarts," Harry said. "The title doesn't come with age restrictions, apparently." "The concern," Vance said, and she'd recalibrated too, her voice now had the quality of someone who has decided to engage genuinely with what they're actually dealing with, "is a power operating in a major institution without oversight, without accountability, without structure. You may have the best of intentions. That's not the point." "I understand the concern," Harry said, and meant it. Genuinely. A power operating without accountability is dangerous, and that's a valid principle regardless of who holds the power. He leaned forward slightly. "But accountability and external control are not the same thing. I'm accountable to the founders, to the castle, to the students who live here. That accountability is more direct and more meaningful than any framework you could create in Whitehall. It's built into the nature of the role. If I act against the interests of this school, the castle can and will respond to that. That's more effective oversight than most human institutions manage." Vance looked at him for a long moment. "You've thought about this carefully," she said. "I think about things carefully," Harry said. "The minister is concerned," she said, with slightly less of the official wrapper, about the reaction in the community. The heir announcement, it spread. You know that. There are people in the wizarding world for whom this represents a challenge to how things are currently structured. Pureblood families with claims, historical and genealogical, to various forms of magical authority. If the ministry is seen to be not managing it, Harry said. Not managing it, she confirmed, with something that might have been reluctant respect. The Malfoy family has contacted someone in the ministry already, Harry said. It wasn't a question. A brief silence. Fudge's collar was doing something uncomfortable. Mr. Potter, Dumbledore said, from his desk, and it was the first time he'd spoken since the meeting began, and Harry noticed that he'd waited quite deliberately until this exact moment. I think it might be helpful to discuss what protections the ministry could offer you, given that your position, as you've outlined, represents a target for those who feel threatened by it. Harry looked at Dumbledore with an awareness of the move, the pivot from control to protection, the sleight of hand that takes a conversation about authority and turns it into a conversation about safety, and filed it alongside everything else he filed about Dumbledore, which was growing into a substantial collection. That's very thoughtful, Harry said. But I'd rather not establish a framework in which my protection is in the ministry's hands. That creates an obligation in the other direction, and I prefer to keep the relationship simple. Fudge said, simple. Mutual respect, Harry said. You leave Hogwarts' internal affairs internal. I don't give anyone cause to suggest that the heir of Hogwarts is acting in ways that require external management. He paused. I'm 11 years old in my first year of school. What I'm mostly doing is going to class and learning things. The scope for controversy is limited. It was precisely the right thing to say, not because it was untrue, exactly, but because it offered Fudge something he could take back to his office, reassurance. The ability to tell concerned parties that the situation had been assessed and that a certain level of calm was warranted. That the boy was sensible. That there was no emergency. Harry watched Fudge's expression and saw the moment he took it. Crouch was less easy. He was looking at Harry with the eyes of someone who professionally studies unprecedented things and has developed good instincts about when the unprecedented thing in front of him is showing him its full shape. The trials, he said. You've entered one. There are how many remaining? 3, Harry said. And when you've completed them all, what's the expected outcome? What does the heir, fully initiated, for lack of a better term, what do they become? Harry thought about the sealed thing in the bedrock. About the door below the lake and the memory in the walls and the widening crack of light in his mind. About 4 keys and 4 trials and something that had been waiting to be triggered. I think that's something I'll understand when I've done the work, he said honestly. I don't know the full picture yet. Crouch looked at him. You're not concerned about that? Walking into things without knowing the full picture is just life, Harry said. You make the best decisions you can with what you have and you pay attention. He paused. I have pretty good instincts about when something is going to hurt me. This isn't hurting me. It's showing me things. The meeting concluded 40 minutes after it started, which was probably shorter than any of the ministry representatives had expected. Fudge shook Harry's hand again with the warmth now entirely genuine, the warmth of someone relieved, and said something about an open door and any concerns, and Vance shook his hand with the firmness of someone who has recategorized him and is still deciding where exactly he fits. Crouch didn't shake his hand. He gave him a look instead, the long, assessing look of someone filing information for future reference. Mr. Potter, he said, at the door. When you've completed the trials, I'd like to know what you find. I'll think about it, Harry said. Which was, he thought, the right answer, not a refusal, not a commitment. Just honesty about where he was in the process. They left. Dumbledore and Harry sat in the office for a moment after the sound of ministry footsteps had faded from the staircase. That, Dumbledore said, was impressively done. Thank you, Harry said. The Malfoy family's ministry contact is a man named Avery, Dumbledore said, and his tone had shifted into something more direct than usual, the tone of someone deciding to exchange information honestly rather than managing it. A former Death Eater who claimed the Imperious Curse. He has Fudge's ear in ways Fudge doesn't fully appreciate. What was sent to the Ministry was a formal complaint requesting an investigation into whether the heir claim represents an illegal seizure of institutional authority. Who filed it? Harry asked. Lucius Malfoy, Dumbledore said. Who is also, incidentally, on the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Harry let that sit for a moment. The chessboard quality of it, Malfoy filing complaints that force Ministry attention, which creates pressure on Dumbledore, which allows Malfoy's influence on the board to operate more freely. A squeeze from two directions. He's trying to use the Ministry as a lever against the school, Harry said. Yes. While simultaneously using his board position to exert direct pressure from inside. Yes. While his son, who he's clearly in regular correspondence with, gathers information from inside the student body. Yes. Dumbledore's eyes were steady on his. You see the shape of it. I see the shape of it, Harry said. It's not bad strategy. It's actually quite good strategy. He paused. What does he actually want? What the Malfoy family has always wanted, Dumbledore said. Influence in proportion to what they consider their importance. And they consider their importance very large. He folded his hands on the desk. The heir declaration threatens that, not just Draco's position, but the entire pure-blood hierarchy's sense of where power properly lives. They think it should live with them, Harry said. They have spent 5 generations and considerable gold ensuring that the wizarding world agrees with them, Dumbledore said. Harry thought about this. He thought about Draco in the corridor with his 3 Slytherin third years, and the careful legal quality of his argument about documented lineage, and the letter that had been composed that same night and sent at dawn. He thought about Lucius Malfoy, who cast a large shadow, and the Ministry official with Fudge's ear. I need to talk to Draco, he said. Dumbledore looked at him. Not as opponents, Harry said. He's 11 years old. He's been raised to believe certain things and to act in certain ways, and he's doing exactly what his father has trained him to do, and I think if I give him a different conversation, a real one, something might shift. He paused. I could be wrong. He might just be what he appears to be. But I'd rather find out. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Harry. Draco Malfoy has been writing to his father every 2 days since the sorting. Whatever you say to him, we'll get back to Lucius, Harry said. I know. That's part of the point. He stood. Whatever I say to Draco, I'd be comfortable saying directly to Lucius Malfoy. So there's no risk in Draco reporting it. He went to the door. Paused with his hand on it. Professor Dumbledore, he said. The thing in the castle that doesn't belong here, the presence. Have you taken any steps toward removing it? A beat. I am managing the situation, Dumbledore said carefully. It's on the 3rd floor, Harry said, under a trapdoor, guarded by a 3-headed dog and what I suspect are several further enchantments. And it's being watched, or stalked, by something using a human host. He turned to look at Dumbledore. Quirrell. The silence in the office was very complete. I confirmed it this morning, Harry said. Not conclusively. But enough. He's hosting something on the back of his head, and that something is aware of me, which means it knows I'm aware of it. He paused. I want to deal with it properly, not reactively. So I'd appreciate knowing what exactly is under that trapdoor, so I can plan around it rather than stumbling into it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the way a man looks when he's fully revising his understanding of a situation he thought he understood. A philosopher's stone, he said finally. Nicholas Flamel's. I moved it here for safekeeping. It restores life, Harry said. And the thing using Quirrell is seeking to use it to restore itself, yes, Dumbledore said quietly. Then we have a timeline, Harry said. When will Quirrell make his move? I don't know precisely. Then I need to be ready before he does. He opened the door. I'll come back to you with a plan. I'd like your honest input on it, not management. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I think we work better as allies than as a headmaster and his student. He went out, and the door clicked quietly shut behind him. Fawkes, on his stand, watched the door close and then turned his amber eyes to Dumbledore and made a sound that was, unmistakably, somewhere between a question and a comment. Yes, Dumbledore said to the Phoenix, very quietly. I know. Harry found Ron and Hermione in the corridor outside the Charms classroom, where they'd been waiting with the patient anxiety of people who have done all their homework twice and are running out of productive uses for waiting energy. Ron stood up the moment he saw Harry's face. Well? Good, Harry said. Better than good, actually. Walk with me, I have things to tell you. They walked, and Harry told them in the manner he'd developed over the past weeks, clear, sequential, the relevant facts without embellishment. First the ministry meeting, which made Hermione look vindicated about the jurisdictional argument and made Ron make a low impressed sound about the Malfoy filing, and then Quirrell. Hermione went very still when he got to Quirrell. You confirmed it, she said. This morning. You actually confirmed that he's hosting, something old and powerful and very aware of what I am, Harry said. Yes. Harry, she said, and her voice had a note in it he hadn't heard from her before, not panic. Hermione didn't do panic, but something adjacent, the sound of someone who has just recalibrated the level of actual danger they're in. That's Voldemort. Yes, Harry said. Ron had gone a particular shade that was his version of processing serious information. He's been teaching us, he said. All term. He's been right there. He's been watching me specifically, Harry said. But he can't move against me directly, not yet. The host situation limits him, and I think there are other factors limiting him as well. He paused. The stone is what he needs. Without it he can't fully restore himself. So the timeline is whenever Quirrell decides the moment is right to go for the stone, and the stone is under the trapdoor on the 3rd floor. Dumbledore confirmed the stone? Hermione said. When I told him I already knew about it, yes. He could have stopped this already, Hermione said, and the note in her voice was different now, the particular disappointment of someone whose faith in an institution has been quietly tested and found wanting. He's the most powerful wizard in Britain. If he knows Quirrell is hosting Voldemort, he's managing it, Harry said. Which is different from resolving it. He wanted to manage it on his own timeline. I've accelerated that timeline by making it clear I'm aware of it, which means Quirrell, and whatever is behind Quirrell, knows I'm aware, which means they'll move sooner rather than later. You did that deliberately, Ron said slowly. I wanted to control when the confrontation happens, Harry said. Not let it happen to me when someone else decides. He stopped walking. They were in an empty corridor, afternoon light coming through a high window, the castle quiet around them. There's a plan forming. I need a few more days. I need to complete as much of the second trial as possible, and I need to understand the 3rd floor defenses properly. And I need to have a conversation with Draco. Draco, Ron said flatly. As in Malfoy. As in, yes. You want to have a conversation with the person who's been writing to his Death Eater father about you every 2 days. Particularly because of that, yes. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Some communication passed between them in the specific register that people develop when they've known each other 3 weeks and have already been through a number of unusual situations. Fine, Ron said. But I'm going to be nearby. Not listening, just nearby. Same, said Hermione. I know, Harry said. He smiled. That's why you're my friends. The corridor was warm with afternoon light, and the castle around them hummed its low reliable hum, and somewhere below them in the deep structure of the building a stone with 4 keys burned a little brighter, and in his pocket the dark green stone pulsed once, gently, in the rhythm of something that had waited 1,000 years and was now beginning, finally, to run. Chapter 5. The Heir's Court. Harry found Draco on a Wednesday evening in the library. Not by accident. He'd spent 2 days watching the pattern of Draco's movements the way he'd learned to watch patterns in the Dursley household, not obsessively, just with the background attention of someone who has found that knowing where people go when they want to think is more useful than knowing what they say in public. Draco went to the library on Wednesday evenings, always to the same table in the restricted section's antechamber, just outside the rope, where the light was good and the other students rarely came. He went alone. Not Crabbe, not Goyle, not the third-year recruits. Alone, which told Harry something important. Whatever Draco thought about in that chair, he didn't want witnesses to it. Harry walked up and sat down across from him without asking. Draco looked up from his book with an expression that moved through surprise, settled into wariness, and then arranged itself into something more composed. Potter. Malfoy. Harry put his elbows on the table. I want to talk to you honestly. Not tactically. Actually honestly. Those are different things. In my experience, yes. Tact is what you do when you care how the other person receives the truth. Strategy is what you do when you care how you appear delivering it. Honesty is what happens when you mostly care about the truth itself. He met Draco's eyes. I want to try the third one. Draco closed his book. He was assessing, which Harry expected. Draco did almost everything with a layer of assessment under it, the trained eye of someone raised to read rooms and assign value. All right, Draco said carefully. Talk. Your father is running a squeeze, Harry said. Ministry complaint through Avery, Board of Governors pressure from his seat, your correspondence giving him internal information. It's good strategy for destabilizing a situation he doesn't control. He paused. But I want you to think about what happens if it works. If the ministry establishes oversight over the heir title, if the board pressures Dumbledore into some formal constraint on what I can do, what does your father actually get? Draco said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. He gets influence, Harry said. Which he already has. And he gets to demonstrate to other pureblood families that he managed this situation, that when something arose that threatened the existing order, Lucius Malfoy was the one who contained it. He let that sit. But the thing he doesn't get is the thing he actually wants. Which is, what, exactly? What does your father want from Hogwarts? He wants Slytherin's legacy respected, Draco said, and the words had a quality of something rehearsed but also, underneath, something that was genuinely believed. This school was built by 4 people. The way things have been for the last century, Slytherin students are treated as the default villain in every story. The dark arts tradition, the pureblood perspective, the value of history and lineage and what came before, those things are dismissed as evil by everyone else in this building. My father believes that's wrong. So do I. Some of it is wrong, Harry said. Draco blinked. The dismissal, Harry said. The way the school treats Slytherin students as a monolith. The assumption that ambition is a character flaw and cunning is something to be ashamed of. That's a real thing and it's genuinely unfair, and I think it makes everyone in this school worse, because when you sort people into a box labeled probably trouble at age 11, they either internalize it or they fight it, and neither of those produces the kind of person Salazar Slytherin actually intended. Draco was very still. I was in Salazar Slytherin's own memory, Harry said. In the trial chamber. He wasn't the story they tell about him. He was a man who made a serious mistake born from fear, who understood his mistake too late to fix it, and who spent the last part of his life building something he hoped would correct it. He kept his voice even. The legacy your father wants respected isn't what Slytherin actually was. It's what a particular group of families decided Slytherin meant, over centuries, to justify their own power. The library around them was quiet. The afternoon had gone to evening while they talked, the high windows darkening, and somewhere in the stacks a first year was putting books away with the soft thudding rhythm of someone who didn't know how to manage a full armful. "You're saying my father is wrong," Draco said. "I'm saying your father's politics serve your father's interests and he's dressed them up as principle," Harry said. "Which is something people do. It's human. But you're not your father. You have his intelligence and his eye for strategy, and none of those things require you to carry the rest of it." Draco looked at him for a long moment. "You're trying to turn me," he said. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation," Harry said. "You can do what you like with it." "Why?" Draco said. "Why does it matter to you what I think? You've already got the castle's backing, the founder's blessing. I need Hogwarts to work," Harry said, and his voice had something in it that was more immediate than everything that came before, less polished, more direct, the sound of something that mattered to him in a way that bypassed performance. "The point of this castle isn't the heir title or the trials or the power, the point is that it's a school. It's a place where children with magic come to learn what they are. And it doesn't work when a quarter of its students are treated as suspects. When the houses are a competition instead of a community. When every first year gets sorted into a side and told to treat the other sides as opponents." He paused. "The founders built something together. Even after Slytherin left, the other three kept his work. Kept his dungeons. Kept his charms in the structure. Because they understood that what he'd built was part of something whole." He looked at Draco. "This is what I was left with. Not a title. A broken thing that was supposed to be whole, and the responsibility to do something about it." Draco looked down at his closed book. Something moved across his face that was young in a way his usual expression wasn't, something less composed. "My father," he said quietly, "will not like anything you've just said. I know. He'll move harder against you. Probably." Harry shrugged. "I'm not afraid of your father, Draco." It was the first time he'd used Draco's name since the corridor with the third years. Draco registered it, as he always did. "You should be," Draco said, but it had less conviction than he'd intended, and he seemed to know it. "He should be afraid of what happens," Harry said simply, "if the thing he's been building his power on, the idea that lineage determines worth, that the right families own the wizarding world, turns out to be exactly as fragile as it actually is." He stood up. "Think about what I said. Not tonight. But think about it." He left Draco in the library and walked back toward Gryffindor Tower, and the castle around him hummed with something that felt like satisfaction, and he thought about what came next. What came next was the heir's court. He'd felt it building for days, the knowledge of it, coming up through the castle's pulse the way water comes up through stone, slow and inevitable. It wasn't something he'd planned or invented. It was something the castle had been preparing him for, the way the fourth-floor door had appeared when he was ready, the way the lake had opened when the timing was right. He'd asked Hermione to research it after he'd first felt the concept forming at the edge of the castle's communication, and she'd come back after 2 days with a look that meant she'd found something both exciting and deeply unsettling. "The heir's court," she said, spreading her notes across the common room table, was a formal convening of the 4 house ghost councils, not just the house ghosts themselves, but a full assembly of every ghost affiliated with each house. It could only be called by the heir, and it happened when the heir determined that the school needed correction. Not governance, not punishment. Correction. Like you'd correct the course of a ship. She looked at her notes. The last one was in 1347. The record says it was called to address a complete breakdown in relations between the houses, where Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students had refused to share the Charms classroom for 2 terms. That sounds trivial, but apparently the underlying conflict was serious enough that the magical output of the student body was measurably declining. "The castle gets sick when the houses fight," Ron said. "Not sick exactly," Harry said slowly, thinking about how the castle felt when Draco's Slytherin block passed Gryffindor students in the corridor and the tension went through both groups like a current. "More like, diminished. Like a piece of music that's lost one of its instruments but is still trying to play. Right, Ron said. Castle gets sad. Got it. How do you call it? Harry asked Hermione. She turned to a different page. According to the record, the heir speaks the convening at the point where the four founder symbols converge. Which is, the center of the Great Hall floor, Harry said immediately. The crossing point of the lines that lit up during the sorting. Hermione pointed at him. Yes. And it happens at night, after the hall has emptied. The ghosts come on their own, apparently. You don't summon them so much as, announce that the space is open. When should we do this? Ron asked. Tomorrow night, Harry said. Ron looked at Hermione. Obviously tomorrow night, Ron agreed. The next day moved with a peculiar quality of anticipation that Harry could feel in the castle's pulse all morning, an alertness, a gathering, as though the building was already preparing itself. He went to classes and paid attention and let the morning be ordinary, because that was another thing he'd learned from the Desley years: let ordinary things be ordinary, save your attention for when it's needed. History of magic was spectacularly useful for exactly nothing. Professor Binns drifting through the material on the Goblin rebellions with the enthusiasm of someone who has been dead for 200 years and is still turning up out of force of habit. Neville fell asleep. Seamus drew something on his parchment that was either a Quidditch pitch or a map of somewhere. Harry spent the class thinking through the third-floor defenses with the part of his mind he kept separate for strategic thinking, mapping what he knew against what he needed to know. After lunch, Snape stopped him in the corridor. Not to punish or antagonize. Snape fell into step beside him with the particular controlled energy of someone who has decided to address a thing directly rather than let it fester, and he said, quietly enough that only Harry could hear, "The ministry meeting." "Yes?" Harry said. "I am told you declined to establish any formal ministry role in Hogwarts affairs." "That's right." "Good." Snape's voice had precisely no warmth in it and also no hostility. It was the voice of someone stating a professional position. The ministry's interest in this school has historically been the primary mechanism by which certain, external parties, have attempted to influence its operation. The Board of Governors is the second mechanism. You are aware of both. Harry looked at him sideways. "You're telling me to watch both?" "I'm telling you nothing," Snape said smoothly. "I am having a corridor conversation about abstract institutional dynamics." He paused at the junction of the next corridor. "Potter. Whatever you are planning, and I know you are planning something, because you have the particular air of a student who has already made up their mind, do not allow Dumbledore to be your primary source of intelligence about what happens in this castle." He turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Harry watched him go and thought, Snape knows about Quirrell. Possibly has known for longer than Dumbledore has managed it. And is, in his own oblique, controlled, entirely graceless way, trying to help. He filed that too. Hermione was waiting at the bottom of the staircase. What did Snape want? To give me a warning he'd committed to not giving me, Harry said. She stared at him. That sentence didn't make sense. It will later. Come on, I want to look at something before tonight. He took them up to the 7th floor, to the stretch of wall across from the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy attempting to teach trolls ballet. He'd been thinking about the variable room since he'd first felt it in the castle's awareness, and today, with the court tonight and everything quickening, felt like the right moment to understand it properly. He walked past the wall 3 times, not knowing exactly why, just following the instinct that the castle had been feeding him for weeks, the deep reliable trust of the connection, and on the 3rd pass a door appeared in the wall that hadn't been there before. Ron looked at it. That's very good. The room of requirement, Hermione breathed. She'd read about it, Harry knew, he could tell from her expression, which was the one she wore when a theoretical thing became actual. It gives you what you need. Harry opened the door. Inside was a large, high-ceilinged space with a circular floor of that same foundational stone, and in the center, a ring of 12 chairs arranged around a low, flat platform. The platform bore the 4 house symbols, carved deep, filled with pigment, Gryffindor's lion and Slytherin's serpent and Ravenclaw's eagle and Hufflepuff's badger, each in its own quadrant of the circle. "It set itself up already," Ron said quietly. "The castle knew I was coming," Harry said. He walked to the center and stood on the platform and looked at the chairs. He could feel the room around him as a specific, concentrated kind of attention, more focused than the rest of the castle, more present, like a lens bringing something into sharp clarity. "Tonight, then," he said aloud. Not to Ron and Hermione. To the room. The platform pulsed once, amber and red and silver and gold and green all at once, a brief vivid flash. "I think it said yes," Ron said. They went to dinner, and dinner was normal, and Harry ate and talked and watched the hall with the particular quality of awareness he kept for rooms, the 4 tables with their specific textures, the tension that lived between Slytherin and Gryffindor like a standing current, the way Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw occupied a middle ground that was less conflict and more indifference, which was its own kind of separation. He watched Draco, who did not look at him directly but whose body language was subtly different from yesterday, less armored, more internal, the look of someone working something out. He watched Quirrell, who ate his dinner mechanically and whose turban sat at its usual angle, and thought about timing, and decided, after the court. After the second trial, which the castle had told him was imminent. Then Quirrell. After dinner, after the hall emptied, after the staff table cleared and the candles dimmed to their nighttime level and the room settled into the specific quiet of a large space emptied of people, Harry went back. He stood at the door to the great hall for a moment, alone, and breathed. Then he pushed the door open and walked to the center. He stood on the crossing point of the 4 carved lines in the floor. In the dark, with just the ambient light of the enchanted ceiling above, the night sky fully deep, stars blazing with no moon, the hall was a completely different place than it was at meal times. He could feel its age. The full weight of 10 centuries of children eating here, learning here, sleeping in the towers above and the dungeons below, carrying their magic up and down these corridors and leaving trace amounts of it in the stones the way footsteps leave impressions in snow. He put his feet on the crossing point and said, "I'm calling the court." Not loudly. Not with performance. With the specific intentional quality of the castle's own communication, not sound so much as resonance. The floor lit. Not the full spectacular display of the sorting night. This was quieter, more deliberate, the 4-color glow moving outward from his feet in measured waves, amber and scarlet and silver blue and gold, reaching the walls and moving up them, and as the light touched the portraits they stirred and murmured, and as the light reached the ceiling the stars above shifted very slightly, a barely perceptible turning, as though the sky had looked down. And then, from the 4 corners of the hall, they came. Not just the house ghosts. The full councils. The nearly headless knight arrived first, floating through the Gryffindor wall with his usual dignity somewhat elevated. He had the bearing of someone who knew this occasion was historically significant and was determined to do it justice. Behind him came a dozen Gryffindor-affiliated ghosts Harry had seen in corridors and classrooms and common rooms. The fat friar in his Hufflepuff corner was not alone either, surrounded by a group of translucent figures in various historical dress. The Grey Lady drifted through the Ravenclaw wall with the particular grace that spoke of someone accustomed to high ceremony, and behind her came the Ravenclaw Council, more numerous than Harry had expected, serious-faced and watchful. From the Slytherin entrance came the Bloody Baron. Harry had seen him before in corridors, a presence that tended to create space around itself, the other ghosts parting slightly, students moving back without quite knowing why. He was chains and stains and a quality of ancient, contained authority, and he crossed the great hall floor with a directness that other ghosts' drifting paths seemed to unconsciously accommodate. He stopped in front of Harry and looked at him with eyes that had been cold for centuries and were now, something else. Not warm. But attentive, in a way that acknowledged something. "Heir," he said. His voice was what Harry had expected, the deep, slightly resonant quality of very old stone in winter. "Baron," Harry said. "It has been long," the Baron said. "I know. The last who stood here as you stand," he paused. "They were ready in a way that could not be argued with. Are you? Tell me what you think after tonight," Harry said. The Baron looked at him for a moment longer. Then he moved aside, and the Slytherin Council took their places. The 12 chairs were occupied now, 3 from each house's council, with the full assembly's position behind them in loose, hovering clusters, all their translucent light mixing in the dark hall into something that was simultaneously all 4 colors and something beyond the sum of them. Harry stood on the platform in the center and felt the room, felt the castle at its most attentive, every stone surface alive with awareness, the pulse under his feet strong and steady. He looked at the assembled ghosts of 1,000 years. "Thank you for coming," he said. And meant it. A murmur moved through the assembled councils, not words, but the sound of a collective settling, the way an audience settles when something begins in earnest. "I'm going to tell you what I see," Harry said, "and then I want to hear what you see, because you've been in this building longer than I have by about 1,000 years and I'd be an idiot not to ask." He paused. "The 4 houses don't function as Salazar Slytherin and Godric Gryffindor and Rowena Ravenclaw and Helga Hufflepuff designed them to function. They were meant to be 4 different ways of knowing, 4 different ways of approaching magic, not 4 competing factions. The competition is a corruption of the design. And it's producing students who are worse at magic and worse at being people than they would be otherwise, because they're spending a significant portion of their energy on opposition instead of learning." Sir Nicholas cleared his throat. "The house system has operated in its current form for a long time," Harry said. "I know. That's not an argument for it." He looked at Sir Nicholas, not unkindly. "How long have you been at Gryffindor table, Sir Nicholas?" "Nearly 5 centuries, Sir Nicholas said." "And in 5 centuries of watching Gryffindor students, what's the most common thing that damages their development?" A pause. "Pride," Sir Nicholas said. "The particular kind that can't admit error." "And where does that pride come from?" Another pause. Longer. "The culture," Sir Nicholas said, and he said it with the slightly pained quality of someone arriving at a conclusion they've been avoiding. "What damages Slytherin students?" Harry asked the Baron. The Baron was quiet for a moment. "Isolation," he said. "The belief that the world beyond these walls is fundamentally hostile to them, which creates the very hostility it fears." "Ravenclaw?" Harry looked at the Grey Lady. She drifted slightly. "Arrogance," she said. "The belief that intelligence is a moral quality. That being clever means being better." "Hufflepuff?" He looked at the fat friar. The friar's cheerful expression held something thoughtful. "Invisibility," the friar said. "The tendency to be overlooked, by the school, by history. It breeds a quietness that is sometimes wisdom and sometimes just giving up." "Right," Harry said. "None of those are characteristics of the house's founding principles. They're the products of a system that pits the houses against each other. They're injuries." He let that word land. The founders built 4 houses because they believed different approaches to learning were all valid and valuable. The rivalry, the point system, the cup, the institutional hierarchy that implicitly ranks the houses, that's centuries of accretion over the original design. It's barnacles on the hull. The fat friar made a small appreciative sound. "That's rather apartment." "What the Heirs Court can do," Harry said, "is not rewrite the school structure overnight. I'm not naive enough to think I can change everything in a year. But the court can make recommendations to the headmaster that carry the weight of the castle's foundational authority, recommendations that aren't just student complaints or staff observations but the combined witness of the ghosts who have watched this building for centuries." He looked around the assembled councils. "I'm asking you to tell me honestly, what do you witness? What needs correction?" For a moment no one spoke. Then the Grey Lady floated forward, and her voice was precise and measured. The academic separation is the most visible symptom. There are no crosshouse classes after third year. Students from Slytherin and Gryffindor who might collaborate, who have complementary strengths, spend 6 years learning that the other is an adversary. The magical advances that come from collaborative work are thereby lost. The school's academic output, she said, with the finality of a woman who has kept records for 9 centuries, is measurably lower than it should be. Sir Nicholas, the dormitory system creates complete social segregation. By 5th year, students of different houses may spend literally months without a substantive conversation across the house boundary. The Baron, the staff replicate the division. Certain professors, not all, but certain ones, use their house affiliation to advantage their students in ways that are not educational but political. The students learn from this. A pause. I include my own house's head in this observation. A ripple went through the assembled councils at that. The Fat Friar, Hufflepuff students regularly find their work overlooked in favor of the more visible narrative houses. The best magical talent in Hufflepuff for the last 40 years has been consistently underdocumented in the school's official records. Harry listened to all of it. He let it run until it found its own end, which took longer than he'd expected, centuries of observation pouring through the opening he'd made by simply asking, and then he said, "Write it down. All of it. Everything you've just said and everything you didn't get to. The Heirs Court's formal record. I'll present it to the headmaster with my own assessment and a set of specific recommendations." "Will he act on it?" the Grey Lady asked. "I'll make sure he understands that the alternative is the castle acting on it directly," Harry said. "Which I think will focus his attention." Something moved through the assembled ghosts, not laughter exactly, but its spiritual cousin. "There is one more thing," the Baron said, and his voice had a specific quality now, not the address to the court tone but something more private, something he was saying directly to Harry. "The presence in this building. The dark thing riding your defense, Professor." "I know," Harry said. "It knows you called this court," the Baron said. "Whatever is on the back of Quirinus Quirrell's head, it is aware. It has been watching this hall. I can feel it from here." He paused. "It is older than I am. And it is afraid of you." "Is it?" Harry said. "Not of your power," the Baron clarified. "Of what you represent. A Hogwarts with a functioning heir, with the court restored, with the foundations active. This is a hostile environment for what it is. A dark consciousness that feeds on division and fear and the rot in institutions." He looked at Harry with those centuries-cold eyes. "This school, healthy, is its natural enemy." Harry thought about that. About the castle as a living thing, about its health and illness, about what it had felt like when Fawkes burned the blocks and the foundational light came up through the floor and everything that had been suppressed came flooding back. He thought about what the castle felt like when the houses moved through it in opposition versus the feeling, rare but present, when something cooperative happened, a shared project, a common room left open, a moment across house lines. "Then let's make it healthy," Harry said. The court began composing its record. They worked for 2 hours in the Great Hall, Harry sitting on the platform while the ghost councils dictated observations and he asked questions that drew out specifics, Hermione having materialized from somewhere near the entrance with a quill and parchment at some point in the first 20 minutes because of course she had. Ron beside her taking notes in his functional handwriting while muttering that this was the most unusual night of his life to date. Near the end of the second hour, Harry became aware that someone else had entered the hall. Draco Malfoy stood at the far end of the room, near the Slytherin table, still in his robes, as though he'd been drawn here from somewhere else and hadn't entirely decided whether he was going to stay. He was looking at the assembled ghost councils with an expression that was doing considerable work, surprise, calculation, recognition, and underneath those, something quieter and less defended. The Baron turned, noticed him, and waited. Harry looked at Draco across the length of the dark hall, the four-color light of the ghosts between them. "There's a chair," Harry said. Not loudly. The hall's acoustics carried it. Draco stood for another moment. Then he walked across the hall and sat in the empty chair beside the Slytherin council, and the Baron turned back to the proceedings, and Draco listened. He didn't speak. He just listened, with the careful quality of someone gathering information that they haven't decided what to do with yet. But his presence was its own statement, that he'd come at all, that he'd stayed. When the session concluded and the ghosts began their slow departure, Harry stood and stretched and noticed that Draco was still seated, looking at the 4 house symbols on the platform floor. "What do you think?" Harry asked. Draco looked up. "My father is going to be furious." "About what specifically?" "About," Draco stopped. Started again. "When I write to him about this, the court, the ghost councils, the formal record, he'll understand what it means. The heir's court record carrying foundational authority, the headmaster being formally advised by the castle itself, it closes the avenue the board has been using. If the castle is actively managed, actively healthy," he paused, "the leverage points disappear." "Yes," Harry said. "You did this deliberately." "I called the court because it needed to be called," Harry said. "The leverage point disappearing is a consequence of the school functioning the way it was designed to." Draco looked at the symbols in the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. "What you said in the library," he said. "About Slytherin." "Yes? I looked some of it up." A pause. "There's a version in the restricted section, a primary source, correspondence between Rowena Ravenclaw and a contemporary, written 2 years after Slytherin left. She says," he stopped, recalibrating. "She says Salazar wept when he crossed the boundary of the grounds for the last time. That he stopped at the edge of the wards and looked back." Draco's voice was level but not easy. "No one writes that in the stories." "No," Harry said. "Why not?" "Because it's complicated," Harry said. "And complicated doesn't serve simple narratives." He looked at Draco. "The Slytherin legacy your father uses to justify his politics, it's not what Slytherin was. Which means the legacy your father is defending is one that Slytherin himself would probably have disagreed with." Draco sat with that for a moment. Then he stood. "I need to think," he said. "Take your time," Harry said. "Don't mistake thinking for agreement," Draco said sharply, a flash of the familiar armor, quickly present, the reflex of someone who doesn't want to look like they're yielding. "I won't," Harry said. "But you came here tonight. That was your choice." Draco left without another word. Harry watched him go and thought, something is shifting there. Not resolved, not settled, but turning in the way that things turn when the right question has been asked. Ron came and stood beside him. "How'd that go?" "Better than it might have," Harry said. "He's going to tell his father all of this." "I know. I want him to." Harry looked at the dark hall, at the 4 symbols on the floor still faintly glowing in the residual light of the court's passing. Lucius Malfoy needs to understand that what he's been maneuvering against is not a confused 11-year-old who got lucky at the sorting. He needs to see the full picture. To what end? Harry was quiet for a moment. Because some people, when they see the full picture, decide to fight harder. And some people, when they see the full picture, decide to reconsider what they're fighting for. He paused. "I don't know which kind Lucius Malfoy is. But I'd rather he make that decision with accurate information than bad." Hermione came up on his other side, parchment folded under her arm. "The record is comprehensive," she said. 6 centuries of ghost observations about house dynamics, academic separation data, staff bias incidents, and 14 specific recommendations ranging from cross-house academic programs to a formal review of the point system. She paused. "I also included 3 appendices." "Of course you did," Ron said affectionately. "The appendices are important," Hermione said. "One of them is a complete statistical analysis of Hufflepuff's underdocumentation issue." "The Friar will love that," Harry said. They walked back toward Gryffindor Tower through the quiet corridors, and the castle around them was, he could feel it, different from how it had been before. Not dramatically. Not in the way of the Sorting Knight's spectacular change. More like the difference in a room after a window has been opened, the same room, the same walls and furniture, but the air in it moving again, the staleness cleared, something that had been close and pressured now given room to breathe. In the walls, in the pulse of the stones under his feet, Harry felt the castle doing something he hadn't felt it do before. Not communication exactly. More like satisfaction. The deep, structural satisfaction of a thing functioning the way it was made to function. He put his hand on the wall as they passed and it pulsed back, warm and steady. 3 things, he thought. The court record to Dumbledore tomorrow. The second trial, which the castle had been building toward for days and which he could feel hovering just past the next corner of timing. And then Quirrell. In that order. But as they climbed toward Gryffindor Tower, with Hermione's notes under her arm and Ron's chest set under his and the night settled deep and quiet around the castle's ancient bones, Harry allowed himself one uncalculated moment, just one, of something close to peace. The castle hummed around him like a living thing, alive in every stone and staircase and cold corridor and sealed vault, and it was his, and he was its, and the weight of that was enormous and real and entirely worth carrying. He went to bed and slept without dreaming, and the 4-color symbols in the great hall floor glowed softly in the empty dark, keeping time. Chapter 6, Fire and Foundation. The second trial came for him on a Thursday morning before anyone else was awake. Harry felt it the way he'd felt the lake, a change in the castle's pulse, but different this time, sharper and more urgent, less patient. Where the lake's call had been deep and slow, like tide, this was more like a struck bell, a single clean resonance that pulled him upright in his bed at 4 in the morning with his heart already moving faster than sleep warranted. He dressed in the dark without waking Ron. The castle led him not downward this time but upward, past the 7th floor, past corridors he'd walked 100 times, to a narrow staircase behind a tapestry that he'd noted in his early morning walks as existing but leading nowhere obvious. Now it led somewhere. He could feel the door at the top before he saw it, the same iron-banded oak, the same pulse of amber light through the keyhole, but smaller than the others, more compact, set into a wall at the top of a staircase that had no right to be this high in the tower. He opened it. The room was full of fire. Not destructive fire. Not burning fire. The room was perhaps 30 feet across and perfectly circular, and the walls were entirely composed of moving flame, not orange and red but every color fire can be when it burns at different temperatures, blue at the base and white at the peaks, and between them every shade of gold and copper and green that fire produces at its outer edges. The room was warm but not hot, bright but not blinding, and the flames on the walls moved in a pattern that was not random, it was deliberate, the way music is deliberate, a structured and intentional thing. In the center of the room stood a single figure. Not a ghost. Not a light figure like in the lake chamber. A construct. Harry understood this immediately, the way you understand the difference between a recording and a living thing, made of fire itself, shaped into human form, standing perhaps 6 feet tall with the quality of Godric Gryffindor in the shape of it, the broad shoulders and direct posture, but no face. Just fire arranged in the form of a person. The second trial, the construct said, and Gryffindor's voice came from it, warm and immediate. My trial. The trial of courage. All right, Harry said. Courage is not the absence of fear, the construct said. I built that idea into every stone of this tower because I watched too many brave people believe they were failing at it when they were afraid. You are going to be afraid in this room. Genuinely. That is the test, not whether you stop being afraid, but what you do while you are. What's going to happen? Harry asked. You're going to face something true, the construct said. Not a monster. Not a spell. The thing that actually frightens you. The real one, underneath the performance of fearlessness you've developed. Harry felt something shift in the room, the fire changing its pattern, the colors moving toward each other, and then, it was Privet Drive. Not visually, not like a vision, it was more complete than that, more present. The smell of it, the quality of air in that specific house, the particular sound of the stairs and the feeling of the cupboard under them, small and close and smelling of dust and old trainers. He wasn't 11. He was 6, or maybe 7, and Aunt Petunia had just said something, he couldn't remember what, didn't need to, the tone of it was enough, the tone that said you are a burden and an inconvenience and the world would be tidier without you in it, and he was in the cupboard and the door was closed and it was dark. He was afraid. Not of the dark specifically. He'd never been afraid of the dark was private, the one place where no one could see you and make assessments. He was afraid of the thing the darkness represented, that it might always be like this. That the world outside the cupboard was the real world, and the real world had decided something about him before he could argue with it, and no amount of magic or fire or 4 founders rising through the floor would change the thing that had been decided about him on Privet Drive when he was too small to understand what was being decided. The construct was watching him. Harry stood in the middle of the trial room and felt the fear fully, didn't push it down, didn't manage it, didn't file it away. Let it be what it was. 6 or 7 years old and alone in a cupboard under the stairs and afraid of something too large to name. Then he thought about what Helga had said about the 4th trial. Worth. Whether you believe you deserve what you've been given. And he thought, this is connected. The fear isn't that the world is hostile. The fear is that the world might be right. That all the things the Dursleys implied about him, too much trouble, too strange, too much, always too much, might be accurate. That Hogwarts and the Founders and the castle's pulse under his feet and Fawkes burning his blocks might all be a mistake that would be corrected when someone finally looked at him closely enough. He held that thought up in the firelit room and looked at it from every angle he had. Then he said, out loud, to the fire and the construct and the trial, that's not true. Not loudly. Not as a declaration. Just honestly, the way you'd correct an error in an equation, without drama, because drama isn't what accuracy requires. The Dursleys were wrong about me. They were wrong in the specific and particular way that frightened people are wrong about things they don't understand. They took a child they didn't understand and decided the child was the problem, because that's easier than examining their own fear. He kept his voice even. I spent 11 years treating their verdict as provisional because I couldn't afford not to, because I was in their house and I was small and I was alone. But I'm not in their house now. I'm not small. And I'm not alone. He looked at the construct. The fear is real. I'm not pretending it isn't. But it's based on a false premise, and I know it is, and I'm going to feel it and keep going anyway. Which is, I believe, your definition of courage. The fire in the walls changed. Not dramatically. It simply became cleaner. All the same colors, all the same motion, but the pattern resolved into something more coherent, the way a chord resolves from dissonance to harmony, and the warmth in the room shifted from the warmth of heat to something else, something that felt like being recognized. Yes, the construct said. Exactly that. And then, in a voice that was less formal and more personal, more like Gryffindor actually sounded in the memory from the lake chamber, you know, I expected it to take longer. How long does it usually take? Harry asked. You're the first to reach it, the construct said. But I've thought about it for 1,000 years, and I expected more resistance. More attempts to be brave rather than honest about being afraid. A pause that felt like reflection. You went straight to the thing. Most people spend the test proving they're not frightened, which is the wrong answer. You felt it and called it by its name. I had good practice, Harry said. You learn what's actually true about yourself in small rooms. The plinth appeared in the center of the floor, the same design as in the lake chamber, and set into it the second stone, this one the deep scarlet of Gryffindor's own color, warm and constant in his palm when he lifted it. The crack of light in his mind widened, and more of the castle's memory became available to him, not just impressions now but something closer to actual images, actual sound, actual sequence. He stood for a moment and simply breathed it in, 1,000 years of children learning to be brave in this building, in all the different ways that bravery looks when you're not performing it. He put the scarlet stone in his pocket beside the dark green one and went back to Gryffindor Tower and got into bed for another hour before Ron's alarm went off, and when Ron looked across at him, Harry just said, "Second trial," and Ron said, "Good," and they got up and went to breakfast. He gave the court record to Dumbledore that morning before classes. The meeting was brief. Harry had learned that brevity with Dumbledore was more effective than length, because Dumbledore's natural mode was the long conversation and brief meetings left him less room to manage the direction. Harry put the parchment on the desk, 47 pages of Hermione's handwriting with the Ghost Council's formal observations and 14 specific recommendations, and said, "The Heir's Court Record. The castle requests the headmaster's formal response within a reasonable period." Dumbledore looked at the parchment. Then at Harry. "The castle requests," he said. "The castle requests," Harry confirmed. "Harry." Dumbledore's voice had something in it that was genuine, the quality it had when he'd talked about Harry's mother. "I owe you an apology that I have been constructing carefully and keep not delivering. For the blocks. For the years of managed information. For treating a person as a variable in a plan rather than as a person." Harry looked at him. "I accept it," he said. "Genuinely. I'm not angry, Dumbledore. I understand why you made the choices you made. Some of them were even right ones. But we're past managing now. What we need is accurate." "Accurate," Dumbledore said. "Here's accurate. Quirrell is going to move within the next week. The dark presence he's hosting knows about the court, knows the castle's health is improving, knows that its window is closing. It needs the stone before the castle becomes too actively hostile to it." Harry sat down without being invited to. "I want to go through the trapdoor tonight." Dumbledore went very still. "Not to fight Voldemort," Harry said. "To be there when Quirrell comes. The difference matters. If I wait for him to breach the defenses, the confrontation happens on his schedule in a space he's prepared. If I go through first, I know the ground, I set the terms." He paused. "I need to know what's under the trapdoor. All of it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and whatever internal argument he'd been having resolved itself in whatever direction it was going to resolve, and he said, "A devil's snare trap. A room of enchanted keys. A life-sized chess set. A troll, already incapacitated, that one isn't active. A poison's riddle of Severus's design. And then the stone's chamber." Harry thought through this quickly, mapping it against what he knew. "The chess set," he said. "A formidable one. Designed to require genuine sacrifice." "Ron," Harry said immediately. "I'm sorry." "Ron Weasley. He's been playing chess since he was 3 years old and he plays at a level that people twice his age find uncomfortable. If I need to move through that room, I want him playing." He saw Dumbledore's expression. "I know you'd rather I go alone." "I'm not going alone. Ron and Hermione come with me to the chess room and stay there. I go through from the chess room onward by myself." He paused. "That's not negotiable." "The poison's riddle," Dumbledore said. "Logic puzzle," Harry said. "Hermione or I can solve it. Probably Hermione faster than me." He paused. "She goes as far as the riddle. Solves it. Stays there. I go through to the stone's chamber alone." Dumbledore looked at him with the expression Harry had come to understand was his most honest one, the one where the careful warmth dropped away and what was underneath was something older and more tired and more real. "You're 11 years old. You keep saying that," Harry said. "As though being 11 makes what's on the back of Quirrell's head less dangerous or more willing to wait for me to grow up." A silence. "Tonight," Dumbledore said finally. "Tonight," Harry confirmed. "And I need one thing from you." "What?" "Don't try to get there first," Harry said. Don't send staff ahead of me, don't try to remove Quirrell from the building before I reach the stone's chamber, don't manage the resolution. Let me do it. Harry, you asked the castle to trust you with the blocks, Harry said, and Fawkes answered. I'm asking you to trust me with this. The castle knows. The castle is ready. And so am I. Fawkes, on his stand, let out a single pure note. Dumbledore looked at the phoenix for a moment, and something in his face did a thing that Harry suspected very few people ever saw, an actual concession, not performed, not managed. The letting go of something he'd been holding for a long time. Tonight, he said. Harry went to class. Defense against the dark arts was the last period of the day, which Harry appreciated as a kind of dark symmetry. He sat in Quirrell's classroom and paid attention to the lecture, Unicorns Today, the properties and protections of unicorn blood, and watched the man at the front of the room with the full attention he'd been developing for weeks, and felt the castle's hostility toward the dark presence coiled in the room with them, a low sustained tension in the walls and floor, the stones themselves registering the thing behind Quirrell's turban the way skin registers cold. Quirrell looked at him once, briefly, near the end of class. Not the professional glance of a teacher checking on a student. Something else. Something that looked out from behind Quirrell's eyes with the quality of age and desperation and intelligence. It lasted exactly 2 seconds and then Quirrell looked away, and Harry noted it, filed it, and kept his face pleasant and attentive. After dinner he found Ron and Hermione in the common room and told them. The telling took 8 minutes. Hermione's responses, in order, a sharp intake of breath at tonight, a focused nodding at the plan, a brief flash of fear at I go through alone that she controlled immediately and replaced with practical engagement. Ron's responses, stillness, the chess player's stillness of someone hearing the board and evaluating, and then, the enchanted chess set. Yes, Harry said. How large? Life-sized, Harry said. Full board. Ron was quiet for a moment that had a very specific quality to it. Right, he said. We're going tonight. Ron, Hermione began. Hermione, I'm going, Ron said, and his voice had something in it that Harry had heard there before but rarely, the voice he used when he'd made a decision that he wasn't going to explain because the explanation was obvious to him and should be obvious to everyone. Harry needs someone to play the chess set and that's me. Full stop. Everything else we work out later. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at Hermione. Neither of them argued. They went at midnight, when the castle was fully settled and the corridors empty. Harry took them down to the 3rd floor with the ease of someone walking a familiar route, not sneaking, exactly, but moving with the specific quality of people who know they belong where they're going even if the rulebook disagrees. The corridor felt different than it had in the daytime. The castle's awareness was focused down here, attentive in a specific way. The door to the forbidden corridor opened at Harry's touch. He hadn't needed to test this, he'd known it would, the way you know things you've understood through the castle's own certainty. The room with Fluffy was dark. The dog was asleep, all 3 heads, breathing in the enormous irregular rhythm of something very large dreaming something vigorous, and on the floor beside the trapdoor a small golden harp was playing itself, enchanted, producing the music that kept Fluffy dormant. Harry looked at the harp and at the trapdoor and then at the sleeping heads and thought, someone has already been here tonight. The harp was Quirrell's work, or rather the thing directing Quirrell's work. They had minutes, not hours. Go, Harry said. He opened the trapdoor and they went through. The devil's snare caught them immediately and immediately released, it recoiled from Harry the way most of the castle's defenses recoiled, recognizing the air, parting like a curtain, and Ron and Hermione tumbled through in his wake into the room of keys. Hundreds of winged keys circling overhead in the dark, the broom already waiting below. Harry was on it in seconds. He'd never had formal flying lessons, wouldn't until next week, but the broom responded to him the way the castle did, with the immediate recognition of something meeting its purpose, and he moved through the cloud of keys with the instinct of someone who can read movement patterns the way he reads rooms, eyes tracking the hundreds of circling shapes until he found the one that was different, the one with the slightly bent wing, the old-fashioned iron, hovering near the ceiling with the particular uncertainty of a key that has been recently used and returned. He caught it on the first pass. "How did you do that so fast?" Ron said, from below. "It was the one that was trying to hide," Harry said, and unlocked the door. The chess room was vast and cold, the stone pieces standing at twice human height, and Harry looked at Ron and Ron looked at the board, and something in Ron's expression went very clean and very clear, the expression of someone who has spent their entire life being told they're ordinary in a family of impressive people, and has just been handed the thing they are genuinely extraordinary at. "The white side," Ron said, already moving. "We take the white side." "Harry, you're a bishop." "Hermione, rook." "I'll be the knight." He was already reading the board with the focus of someone for whom this is not a game but a language. "We go in 3 moves or we go in 12. "I'm thinking 3. "3, Harry said. 3 it is. "Follow my lead exactly. Don't move until I say." They moved. Ron called it like he was reading music. "Hermione, 3 spaces left, hold, Harry, diagonal, now," and the black pieces moved in response with the full intimidating force of magical enchantment, a queen the size of a small building sweeping toward them, knights with swords drawn, and Ron in his white knight armor took the blow that cleared the path, and the board recognized checkmate at move 8, not 3 and not 12 but 8. Ron's gift for improvisation applied to the moment the plan changed and finding the better route in real time. He went down hard. Ron, Hermione was at his side before the piece stopped moving, her hands on his face, her wand out. "Fine," Ron said, blurred but audible. "Go. Harry, go." Harry went. The poison's riddle was Hermione's in 40 seconds, she didn't even read it through completely, she was already eliminating options by the second line, the specific thrill of someone who has waited years for a problem to be hard enough to be worth solving. "The small bottle," she said. "Far left. Go forward, come back with the round one." "Stay here," Harry said. "Obviously," she said, without looking up from the riddle because she was already reading it again to check her own work. Harry took the small bottle, drank it, and went through the black fire. The final chamber. The mirror of Eriste stood in the center of the room, enormous and ancient, its gold frame gleaming in a light that came from everywhere and nowhere. Harry had never seen it before and knew it immediately, the way he knew things through the castle's memory, the full context of it arriving with the sight of it, a mirror that shows you the deepest desire of your heart. That had been moved here specifically because the way to retrieve the stone from it required wanting to find the stone but not wanting to use it. Quirrell was already there. He was standing before the mirror with his back to Harry, his robes still, the casual performance of nervousness entirely abandoned now. When Harry walked into the room, Quirrell turned, and his face was different, not the stuttering, perspiring professor but something older and colder wearing the professor's face, and the turban was already beginning to unwrap at the edges as though whatever was underneath it was preparing to be more fully present. "Potter," Quirrell said, and the stutter was completely gone. His voice was clear and cold and intelligent. "I wondered when you'd arrive. Though I expected you to wait for Dumbledore to lead you here." "I don't need leading," Harry said. He looked at the mirror. He could already feel the stone, not visually, not through normal magical sense, but through the castle's awareness, which recognized the stone the way it recognized everything that had been placed in its structure. It was inside the mirror, suspended in whatever enchantment Dumbledore had built around it. "You know what I need," Quirrell said. He was still several feet from the mirror, which meant he hadn't managed to extract the stone yet. "You understand what I'm carrying. The form I was reduced to." Something moved in his face, genuine hatred, bright and old. 11 years. Barely alive. Clinging to the body of this inadequate vessel, because I had no choice. "I know," Harry said. "You have no idea what it is to be what I am," Quirrell said. "To be the greatest wizard of the age reduced to, I know what it is to be diminished, Harry said. To have your real self caged by someone else's choices. To live for years as less than you should be because someone decided it was convenient. He looked at Quirrell steadily. I'm not sympathetic to you. But I understand the experience. Quirrell looked at him with something that was, for one unguarded moment, actually surprised. Then the cold closed back over it. You're blocking access to the stone. Yes, Harry said. You cannot stop me. Whatever the castle has given you, I can stop you, Harry said simply. Not because I'm more powerful than what's on the back of your head in raw terms. But because the stone requires someone who wants to find it and not use it. You want to use it. You'll never pull it from the mirror. He paused. And I've been here for 4 months as the heir of this castle. Everything in this room recognizes me. He looked at the mirror. Not at his own reflection. He made a deliberate choice not to look at it directly, because he didn't need to know what he desired most right now. That wasn't useful information in this moment, but at the stone. He reached through the castle's awareness, the connection that had been growing since September, the pulse and warmth and the widening light in his mind, and he reached it toward the mirror specifically, toward the enchantment Dumbledore had built, and said to the castle the same thing he'd said on the first morning when he sat in the common room with his hand on the stone arm of the chair. Hello. The mirror pulsed. The reflection moved, not showing him his desire but responding to the heir's presence the way every other sealed thing in the castle had responded, with recognition, and the stone moved through the enchantment and into his pocket with a weight that was physical and something else simultaneously. Quirrell's expression broke. It was a real break, the composed coldness fracturing, something raw underneath. He looked at Harry's pocket and then at Harry's face, and the thing behind his eyes surged forward, and then the turban was off and Harry saw the face on the back of Quirrell's head, and it was what he'd expected, something that had once been a man and was now a diminished, burning concentration of will and hatred, barely substantial, existing through fury alone. Give it to me, the voice said, and it came from the face on the back of Quirrell's head, thin and high and wrong in every particular. No, Harry said. Quirrell turned his body to face Harry fully, which put Voldemort's face forward. The eyes in that face were red and they fixed on Harry with the full weight of whatever remained of the most feared dark wizard in a century. Harry met those eyes. He wasn't afraid. He'd done the fear in the trial room, held it up and named it and walked through it. There was no performance of fearlessness here, no bravado. Just a genuine and complete absence of terror, because the thing in front of him was operating from desperation, and he was operating from something that had been building for 4 months in the pulse and warmth of this ancient, living building. You cannot hold what you are holding, Voldemort said. You don't understand what that stone can do. What I could do with it. What I could give you, my parents, Harry said. That's what you'd offer me. That's the most obvious thing. A silence. I don't want them back that way, Harry said. Restored by a stone, at the cost of everything that stone represents. That's not what they died for. He looked at the red eyes steadily. You killed them because of a prophecy that said I'd be your equal. And here we are. Equal in exactly the sense the prophecy meant. You are a child, Voldemort said, and the contempt was real, but so was something beneath it. Something Harry would later identify as the first time the Dark Lord had genuinely not known what to do. You are 11 years old with some sensitivity to a building's magic and a handful of pretty stones. I'm the heir of Hogwarts, Harry said, and this castle is mine and does not want you in it. He pressed his foot to the floor. The castle moved. Not the gentle pulse of recognition, not the warm awareness of an inhabited building. The castle moved the way it had moved on the sorting night, fully and without reservation, but this time it was not a welcome, it was a rejection. The walls of the chamber lit with the same amber foundation light, and from that light came something that was not warmth but pressure, specific and directional, the castle throwing its full accumulated weight against the foreign presence in its deepest room, against the dark consciousness clinging to the inside of Quirrell's skull, and the effect was immediate. Quirrell screamed. Not Quirrell's voice, The thing inside Quirrell, burning, the same way that when Harry had reached out after the blocks were removed the touch of his magic on Quirrell's hand at the leaky cauldron had seared. The castle's light was the same thing scaled up by 10 centuries of intention and foundation, and it was catastrophically hostile to whatever Voldemort was, and Voldemort knew it. The dark consciousness tore itself free. Harry felt it go, a cold whine through the room, a sound that wasn't quite sound, a concentrated hatred moving through the stone walls and away, forced out through the castle's own fabric, expelled into the October night beyond the wards. Not destroyed. Harry knew it wasn't destroyed. But driven out, reduced further, forced back to the most tenuous kind of existence. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him, an instinct, unplanned, catching the man before he hit the stone floor, which was strange and probably unnecessary, and he did it anyway. Quirrell was barely conscious, his body already failing in the ways it had been failing for months under the strain of the possession, and he looked up at Harry with eyes that were simply a man's eyes now, cleared of the presence that had been wearing them. "He's gone," Quirrell said. "He's gone," Harry confirmed. "I didn't," Quirrell's voice was very thin. I thought he could give me, what?" Harry asked. "Power," Quirrell said, and the word came out small and truthful. I wanted to be someone who mattered. In the world. I wanted to matter." Harry looked at him. "I know," he said. "I understand wanting that." He kept his voice even. "But you chose the wrong teacher." Quirrell closed his eyes. Harry set him down carefully and stood, and the stone was warm in his pocket, and the castle settled around him like a held breath releasing, the foundation light dimming back to its usual ambient level, the pressure easing, the stones returning to their low warm hum of simple existence. He stood alone in the deep chamber under the lake and looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back at him. He'd managed not to look directly at it during the confrontation, and now he did, with the deliberate choice of someone who has decided to know a thing. The reflection showed him standing exactly where he was standing. No different. No vision of his parents, no grand future, no crown or throne or symbol of power. Just him. Standing in a stone room. With his hand in his pocket and the stone warm under his fingers. It took him a moment to understand, and when he understood he almost laughed. The mirror showed him what he desired most. And what he desired most was exactly this, not a symbol of it, not a fantasy version, just actually being here, actually doing this, actually being the person who could stand in this room and handle this situation. Being real and present and capable and honest. He was, for the first time in his life, exactly what he wanted to be. He took the stone out of his pocket and looked at it. Red, smooth, about the size of a large walnut. He thought about what it could do, the elixir of life, restoration, the end of death for as long as you chose to drink. He thought about Flamel, old and patient, who had chosen centuries of life and presumably knew why. He put it back in his pocket. He went back through the black fire, through the potions room where Hermione was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall still rereading the riddle and making notes in the margin for what she called post-exercise analysis, through the chess room where Ron was sitting up with his head in his hands and one arm in a splint and the chess set standing at checkmate around him, and Harry went to Ron first and sat down beside him on the cold stone floor. "Well?" Ron said. "Done," Harry said. "Voldemort?" "Gone. Out of the castle. Not destroyed, but gone and, much diminished." He looked at Ron's splint. "How bad is that?" "Not bad," Ron said. "I've been hit harder by Fred in the garden." He looked at Harry with the steady directness he had when something mattered. "You did it alone." "I did it in a building full of people I trust," Harry said. "That's not the same as alone." Ron nodded, and something about his posture shifted, relaxed, settled, the chess player's satisfaction of a game played exactly as well as it could be played. "Good," he said. Hermione appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene, Harry sitting on the floor, Ron with his splint, the checkmate chess set surrounding them, and her expression did the thing where relief and emotional restraint competed for exactly 2 seconds before she came and sat down on Harry's other side without saying anything, which was its own complete communication. They sat on the cold stone floor in the deep part of the castle with Hermione's shoulder against Harry's left arm and Ron's against his right, and the chess pieces stood there silent enormous witnesses around them, and somewhere above them the castle breathed its old slow breath. "We should get Ron to the hospital wing," Harry said eventually. "In a minute," Ron said. "In a minute," Hermione agreed. They stayed on the floor for another while, and the castle was warm around them, and the stone was quiet in Harry's pocket. Dumbledore came for them an hour later, navigating the chambers in a way that suggested he'd waited as long as he could stand before following, which Harry appreciated as its own kind of trust. He found them in the chess room, still sitting, and he looked at the checkmate board and at Quirrell levitated carefully behind Harry on a conjured stretcher and at Harry himself, and whatever assessment he made, he kept it quiet. He conjured tea. They drank it on the cold floor in the deep part of the castle, and Dumbledore sat on a white queen's throne because there was nowhere else, and Harry took the stone out of his pocket and put it in Dumbledore's hand without being asked. "Flamel should have it back," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. He looked at the stone for a long moment and then put it in his own pocket with the careful hands of someone returning a borrowed thing. "I'll see to it personally." He looked at Harry. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "And then, more honestly, I will be." Dumbledore nodded. He drank his tea and looked at the chess set and said, to Ron, "That was extraordinary work." Ron made a dismissive gesture that was not entirely convincing. "Just chess," he said. "Not at all," Dumbledore said. "Never just chess." They went up through the castle's layers in the early morning dark, carrying Ron between them and Quirrell floating behind, and Harry felt the castle around them as they moved through it, felt its awareness of what had happened and what had been resolved, the clearing quality of a presence removed, the settling of something that had been alert and braced going back to its normal register. The pulse under his feet was different than it had been all term, not stronger, necessarily, but cleaner. More itself. He put his hand on the wall in the third-floor corridor and the castle pulsed back and it said, in its wordless foundational language, "Good." The sun was coming up by the time they reached the hospital wing, threading in through the east-facing windows in the long gold bars of early morning, and Madame Pomfrey received them with the efficient outrage of a medical professional confronted with preventable injuries at 5 in the morning, and settled Ron into a bed and told Harry and Hermione they needed sleep and Dumbledore that he ought to know better. Dumbledore accepted this with the grace of long practice. Harry and Hermione walked back toward Gryffindor Tower through corridors that were just beginning to feel the first stirrings of a waking school, distant sounds of movement from dormitories, a ghost drifting through a wall ahead of them, the portraits beginning to shift and mutter. The sun was properly up now, the castle full of ordinary golden morning, and it was somehow remarkable, Harry thought, that it was the same building as the one in the deep chamber below, the same stones, the same ancient pulse, the same foundational character, wearing its daytime face. "Are you all right?" Hermione asked. She was watching him with the particular attention she reserved for things she couldn't quite categorize. "Yes," Harry said. "I've been sitting with it. What it felt like when the castle pushed him out. I think that's what I needed to understand about this whole thing." He put his hand on the wall as they walked. "It wasn't me against Voldemort. It was 1,000 years of this building, and the people who built it and the people who've lived in it and the intentions that were woven into the stone, all of that, acting through me as the connection point." He paused. "I was the conductor. Not the orchestra." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "That's either very philosophical or very accurate." "Maybe both," Harry said. "What happens now?" she asked. Harry thought about the 2 stones in his pocket, dark green and scarlet, 2 trials done, 2 remaining. He thought about the court record on Dumbledore's desk and the 14 recommendations and what implementing them would actually look like in the life of the school. He thought about Draco, who had come to the court and sat with the Slytherin Ghost Council and listened and had not said anything to his father yet. Harry was certain of this because the castle told him in its quiet way that the letter Draco had written the morning after the court was still in his dormitory, unsent. He thought about Ron in the hospital bed with his splint and his satisfaction, and about Hermione who had solved the poisons riddle in 40 seconds and was still quietly proud of it, and about Fawkes, who was probably on his stand in Dumbledore's office right now, preening one wing and being magnificent without effort. He thought about what the mirror had shown him. Just himself. Standing where he was standing. Being what he was. The year's not done, Harry said. There's still 2 trials. The school still needs work. There are still people in the wizarding world who are going to push back against everything that happened here. He paused. And Voldemort's not gone. He's diminished. He'll reconstitute himself somehow, somewhere, eventually. He looked at the wall under his palm. But tonight the castle is well, and Ron is going to be fine, and the stone is going back to Flammel, and Voldemort got thrown out of this building by the people who built it. He thought about Slytherin stopping at the edge of the wards and looking back. About the thing he'd built in the bedrock and left for whoever came. About courage and wisdom and memory and whatever Helga Hufflepuff had hidden in her trial that Gryffindor had called the hardest. What happens now, Harry said, is we keep going. The portrait hole opened without the password when he approached it. The fat lady beamed at him with the specific pride of someone adjacent to important events. Inside, the common room was warm and empty and the fire had rebuilt itself in the night. He sat in his chair. Put his hand on the stone arm. Felt the pulse. The castle breathed. 2 stones in his pocket, 2 more to earn. A court record waiting for implementation. A school that had been sick and was, slowly, beginning to be well. A year that had started with a phoenix burning away everything that had been used to diminish him and ended, for now, for this chapter, with him sitting in a chair in a tower at dawn with his hand on warm stone and the morning coming through the windows in bars of clean gold. Not a weapon. Not a symbol. Not a managed variable in someone else's plan. The Heir of Hogwarts. His. And worth it.